Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm going to continue the series What If Deku Was Rejected by All Might Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Deku was lying in bed with his phone near his cheek, staring up at his room's darkened ceiling with the dim light from the screen barely highlighting his face's features. In contrast to the quiet surrounding him, Uraraka's gentle voice could be heard over the speaker. "Did your mother chastise you?" she inquired in a kind but worried tone. He put an ice pack over his eye and said, "No, and she didn't punish me either. When I told her that the fight was with Kachan, she assumed it was just self-defense." That's accurate. Despite the fact that Kachan initiated it. If I'm telling the truth, I've been wanting to confront him for some time. Don't misunderstand, Uraraka. I have no resentment toward Kachan for harassing me at school, regardless of what has transpired in the past. It's just that now that I've gotten a little stronger, a part of me wanted to see if the gap between us was still as wide, or if it had closed even just a bit. I see. How are you feeling right now? Deku considered it for a while. Everything seemed a little clearer as he lay there in his room's silence. I have a better idea. I was able to let him know that I planned to catch up to him during the fight, and I also gained a better understanding of Kachan. He told me that when I offered to help, it bothered him because he doesn't want to be viewed as weak. But it all began when you were just 4 years old, Uraraka answered, her tone tinged with a little disbelief. Bakugo ought to have moved on from it by now. Don't you think that sounds rather immature? He acknowledged. However, after listening to him and considering it, I came to the realization that I had experienced something similar when I was that age, involving something my mother had said. Deku mentally reenacted the scene. I asked my mother if I could still be like All Might when I was 4 years old, and the doctor advised me to give up on being a hero. She broke down in tears and apologized. Deku's eyes narrowed under the pressure of that recollection. The echo of that childhood despair, the feeling that his dream was falling apart, he could still feel it. I didn't want to hear those words right then and there. She seemed to be pleading with me to give up while also showing me sympathy. I can't really ignore what bothered Kachan so much because of this. But you didn't do it on purpose, did you? Uraraka made an effort to lighten the atmosphere. You really did care about him when you offered to assist him, after all. That's precisely what I told my mother when we spoke. After all these years, I didn't want her to feel sorry. Deku put the ice pack back over his eye and slowly rolled onto his bed, the mattress creaking beneath him. I then informed her that I would like to try the UA entrance exam, and she assured me that she would help me going forward. Deku, I'm so happy for you, so I was correct. Uraraka's words caused Deku to smile and feel a surge of warmth in his chest, but he reacted abruptly. Ah, apologies. For a long time, I believe I have been talking about myself. You must be bored with me. Not at all. These tales of boy rivalry are as captivating as if I were reading them directly from a manga. The protagonists would undoubtedly be you too. At the mental image, Deku couldn't help but laugh nervously. Hee, Uraraka, you are so adorable. Ah, oh. Even though they weren't physically together, the awkwardness between them was evident in an instant, and Midoriya once again swore at himself for feeling and thinking that they were too compromising. As the heat rose to his cheeks, he thought, it feels like we're lying in bed together. At what point had he fallen to his knees in conversation with Uraraka? Was he too preoccupied to notice? Was he somehow enjoying this awkwardness now? Is the more important query? He sat up in bed and gave a firm shake of his head. You are. Deku, Uraraka replied quietly, very sweet too, and Midoriya felt a sudden shock in his chest. She is actually telling me now. He dropped the phone unintentionally as his hands began to shake. His fingers slipped clumsily over the screen as he attempted to pick it up, and to his horror, he ended the call by accident. He mimicked the well-known pose from the screen painting as he froze, his face turning pale. Oh no. I must give her another call. As he attempted to recuperate from the shock, he thought. He was about to do so, however, when his phone vibrated in his hand and displayed a message from Uraraka. You must be worn out. Tomorrow, let's talk. Good night. Deku sighed with relief, but his cheeks continued to be warm. He quickly replied, good night, and I'm sorry, being careful not to make the same mistake twice. When he finally calmed down, he lay on his side and put the phone next to his pillow. But despite his best efforts to unwind, his thoughts kept reliving the incidents. He kept thinking about Uraraka's words, and each time he recalled them, his heart raced. How can I sleep when I'm feeling so nervous? Uraraka was in her pajamas, flushed, and holding her phone to her chest. Deku. As the waves crashed gently onto the beach, the horizon was already beginning to turn gold with the glow of dawn. In stark contrast to the tension that was gradually developing between Izuku and Uraraka, a light, salty breeze blew through the air. As they both got ready for the impending battle, their feet, firmly planted in the sand, appeared to be the physical embodiment of their resolve. Uraraka smiled, but there was an unmistakable seriousness in her eyes. "I'm glad you agreed to come earlier, Deku," she said. "We will witness the outcomes of our training today. Compared to my martial arts, your fighting style is mixed. And you understand that I don't want you to be easy on me. Not because I'm a girl, and certainly not because we're friends." Feeling the impact of what she had said, Izuku nodded slowly. His green hair fluttered in the breeze, but his eyes were fixed on her, intent, as though he knew that today would be important for them both. "I get it, Uraraka." He didn't hold back. Instead, he answered forcefully, taking a defensive posture as though his mind was already formulating possible tactics and moves. They were surrounded by a warm light as the sun, which was still low, started to rise over the horizon. The world itself seemed to be at peace, silently watching what was going to take place. Uraraka moved first, startling anyone who misjudged her strength with the speed with which she hurled herself at him. A flying kick followed a clean punch. Despite being impressed, Izuku skillfully deflected both attacks, his mind sharpened as he examined each move. The rhythm of their steps was marked by the sound of shifting sand beneath them. Uraraka merely took a small step back, her eyes glimmering with surprise. She stumbled back on the sand, though, as Izuku gently pushed her with both hands against her chest before she could fully recover. Uraraka felt a slight flush come over her cheeks, but she tried to hide it while maintaining eye contact with him. A simple shove would not divert her attention. But as she took another step forward, she became aware of something. Izuku wasn't really retaliating, but he was deflecting her blows and planning her next move. He was merely pushing her away with soft motions, deflecting her blows. She started to feel frustrated, and after a last round of strikes, Uraraka stopped, her breathing a little more labored. "Deku," she said, with a hint of annoyance mixed with determination. "I'm not being attacked by you. Don't hold back, I told you. Fight me as if you were Bakugo." She spoke with such intensity that Izuku was momentarily silent, but in him, something clicked. She was asking him to give it his all, and he couldn't undervalue her. He gave a serious nod while clenching his fists. Izuku took a step forward without saying anything. He moved more quickly and accurately this time. He launched a series of well-planned attacks before Uraraka could even react. Every blow was powerful but controlled, with genuine intent. She took a step back, trying to keep her balance as she felt the sand move underfoot. Izuku continued. In an instant, he executed the same move he had rehearsed with Bakugo, snagging Uraraka in a quick, powerful grip and bringing her to the sand with firmness but gentleness. Their bodies were worn out from the effort, and they were both breathing heavily. Lying on the sand, Uraraka gazed up at the blue sky for a moment, trying to comprehend how Izuku had so swiftly overcome her. She sighed in surprise and, at last, gave him the thumbs up, smiling as she acknowledged her defeat. "Okay, Deku." Her voice was breathless but full of admiration as she spoke. "You prevail. You're really quick." Breathing heavily himself, Izuku leaned over her and put his hands on either side of her body to form a barrier. His green eyes, still glimmering from the excitement of the battle, stared at her with a ferocity Uraraka had never witnessed. "Uraraka." His voice was a little shaky as he started. "I take it you said there was no holding back?" He took a moment to gather his courage. Then, "I must make a confession. You are more than just a friend to me." Uraraka's heart was thumping in her chest. She was totally unprepared for what he said, and her cheeks began to flush. She couldn't help but smile and let out a quiet laugh in spite of her bewilderment. "Deku, that was a strange way to put it." With her eyes shining with a mixture of nervousness and sincerity, she whispered. "However, I understand. You are more than just a friend to me." Izuku leaned in a bit closer, making the moment even more intimate. Uraraka closed her eyes, her heart pounding with anticipation, sensing that something special was about to happen. But after a few seconds, she didn't experience the sensation she had anticipated. She opened her eyes in confusion to see Izuku staring at her with a very focused expression. "Don't hold back," he whispered, and Izuku started removing his shirt before Uraraka could comprehend what was happening. "What are you doing, Deku?" Uraraka cried out, her thoughts racing. "Don't hold back," he said again, moving dangerously close and lowering his hands until they made contact with one of her breasts. "Uraraka." He spoke so passionately that she was out of breath. No. Once more, before she could calmly process the situation, she punched him so forcefully that the center of Izuku's face became cartoonishly flattened, motivated by a reflex stronger than any other emotion. Actually, Uraraka awoke with a start and discovered that she had struck her own face in her sleep. Her heart continued to race from the intensity of the dream, even though the only thing around her was the darkness of her room. No, no, she thought as she put her hands on her cheeks and shook her head, still flushed. Deku is the most innocent and sweetest of all. He would never act in such a manner. In an attempt to clear her dream of the images, she lightly tapped her head a few times. That wasn't adorable. Not cute at all. Midoriya had an odd feeling. He was unable to move or open his eyes, but he was aware that he was still in bed and that night had fallen. Most likely, it was just another episode of sleep paralysis he had encountered. He waited because, somehow, he knew that he would soon be able to move once more. Slowly, in almost complete silence, time went by. Then suddenly he felt as though someone was standing on top of him. This presence felt strangely warm, as if it belonged to someone familiar, someone close, in contrast to the usual frightful feeling that is frequently recounted in tales of sleep paralysis. Slowly, the figure moved from his stomach to his chest under his blankets with a spooky familiarity. Deku. The voice was gentle, kind, and full of love. He was unable to see who it was, but he knew without opening his eyes. His heart somehow started to race when he realized it was Uraraka, her presence undeniable. Her warmth pressed against his chest, and as she rose higher, his heart rate spiked and his breathing became erratic. Deku. She said again, getting closer and stroking his skin with her warm breath. He tried to relax, but his body and face started to heat up, and he was powerless to stop it. The warmth of Uraraka's body so near to his, the pressure on his chest. Everything was so unclear. He made an effort to get out of the situation by moving, but he stayed still. He was left speechless by the sudden tenderness with which Uraraka pulled his head against her chest. Each pulse of her heart matched his own pounding heartbeat, causing it to thud softly against his face. She whispered, "You're so sweet." Her words were like an electric shock to him. Oh no, what is this? Paralysis from a fantasy while you're sleeping. He pondered, attempting to make sense of everything. It was all so warm and real, but it isn't possible. He needed to take action. This was incorrect. Internally, he battled to keep from losing himself in the moment, telling himself that he needed to escape the confusion. However, it got harder the harder he tried. Uraraka's weight on him, her body's warmth, her skin's softness against his. It was too much. For a few minutes, all he could sense was Uraraka's body shifting beside his, as though she was trying to find the ideal position. He attempted to move, but all he could do was twitch his fingers slightly because his right arm was pinned beneath her. His breath ragged from the strain, he finally rolled his body to the right with great effort. However, rather than fully awakening, the fantasy continued. Uraraka's body was now huddled up against his, her neck resting just below his nose and her hip gently pressing against his abdomen. She had a wonderful scent. It seemed as though they were lying together. He wasn't going to act like this fantasy had just come to him. He knew these thoughts had been there for some time. Recently, he had been thinking about Uraraka, his feelings for her, and his admiration for her. All of those emotions were now only heightened by this combination of paralysis and dreams. He imagined putting his arm around Uraraka's waist, holding her tenderly, and burying his nose in the crook of her neck, where he imagined her warmth and scent would envelop him. He accepted this, allowing himself to indulge in the fantasy for a little while longer. Before long, he fell back asleep. Izuku took a seat and started eating his breakfast, holding his chopsticks in one hand. He tried not to show it, but a faint smile came to his lips from a pleasant dream that he could hardly remember. He was unable to recall the specifics, but the sense of satisfaction persisted, as though he had woken up with new vitality. His mother said, "You look very happy this morning, and with quite an appetite, Izuku," while putting a bowl of rice in front of him and lovingly observing her son. She had always been able to see him clearly. Really? He tried to minimize it by responding with a quiet laugh. "Mother, you must be dreaming. Nothing noteworthy is happening." His positive attitude was evident despite what he said. Savoring the warmth of the family moment, he took a bite of rice. That playful mood, though, was abruptly broken when he noticed an announcement on the television. The voice of the news anchor was solemn. "Exciting news. At UA's Hero Academy facilities this morning." Upon observing the change in tone on the TV, his mother reached for the remote control and increased the volume. They both took a break from eating to listen. The heroin recovery girl was discovered dead in her workspace. Natural causes have been identified as the cause. all schools nationwide are to observe today as a national day of mourning for non-essential activities. Izuku and his mother exchanged a sorrowful glance, and the bowl of rice was briefly forgotten. In addition to her special healing skills, Recovery Girl had been a pivotal figure at UA because of her compassion and commitment to all UA students and staff. His mother turned back to the screen and sighed, murmuring, "Oh, how sad, but I guess she was already pretty old." Before a face appeared on the screen, the news continued to show pictures of the UA campus. Izuku recognized it right away as Shota Aizawa, the school's new principal. Although he had heard of him, he had never before seen him in public. The reporter said, "Next, we have a statement from UA's current principal." The man who emerged had his hair pulled back into a ponytail and was dressed in a formal suit. He had a severe face and a hard gaze that exuded discipline and authority. Izuku was struck by how serious he appeared, as though each word he was about to utter were weighty. The principal started off with a somber and straightforward tone. The loss of Recovery Girl is a harsh blow to heroes and society as a whole. Her life served as an illustration of total commitment and selflessness. Being a hero requires complete dedication and goes beyond simply saving lives. From now on, anyone hoping to be a hero will have to reconsider. We can no longer depend on someone to pick us up when we fall. Numerous things are altered by this, including the forthcoming UA entrance exam. Only the most qualified candidates will be permitted entry due to more stringent screening procedures. This is to keep you safe. The principal's words sent a shiver down Izuku's spine. Those words seemed to be directed at him specifically. The hunger he had experienced moments before had given way to a mixture of anxiety and resolve as he gazed down at his bowl of rice. He was aware that the road to heroism had never been easy, but without Recovery Girl, it would be even riskier. Even though it was raining heavily, Izuku seemed unconcerned. Wrapped in his yellow raincoat, he ran through the rain, his steady stride resonating on the park's track. As his controlled breathing blended with the sound of raindrops hitting the pavement, water splashed all around him. He had been running for more than 5 hours and had hardly noticed the passing of time. Far from his everyday concerns, the track's emptiness and the steady rhythm of the rain kept him in a state of near meditation. His legs begged for a rest, so he chose to pause for a while. He approached a puddle slowly and gazed at his warped reflection in the water. He briefly allowed his imagination to run wild, as his yellow raincoat gave him the appearance of a hero wearing a cape. Protecting others with unstoppable strength, he saw himself as the hero he had always dreamed of being. He instantly blushed as a wave of embarrassment passed over him as he struck a heroic pose. He scratched the back of his neck and quickly straightened up. "This is really dumb." As he smiled awkwardly, he muttered to himself. Then a woman's voice cut through his mind. "Pardon me, could I hand you a flyer?" Looking around, Izuku saw a woman a few meters away. Her large figure was barely protected by a small umbrella, and she carried a stack of papers under her arm. Although she was commanding, her voice was quiet, almost shy. Her offer was rudely turned down by a man in the park. "Do you not see that the rain is still falling? In this weather, who distributes flyers? Strange," the man muttered, turning to leave in frustration. She appeared to be affected by the sudden rejection. She was holding flyers when they fell out of her hands and onto the damp floor. A gust of wind grabbed the umbrella out of her hand as she leaned down to pick them up. Izuku's reaction was instinctive. He leapt to his feet, grabbed the umbrella before it could fly away, and ran to her. He rushed to assist her in picking up the strewn flyers from the ground as the rain soaked everything in its path. "How are you?" he asked smilingly as he handed her the flyers he had collected and held the umbrella over her. The woman gave him a startled look before grinning appreciatively. Izuku saw her height up close, his green eyes rising to her face, which was softly shaped but distinctly fox-like. She laughed softly as she pulled up the hood of his raincoat, which had fallen because of the wind, and said, "Thank you so much, little crying hero." "Oh, no, it's not tears," Izuku quickly explained, massaging his face with his forearm. "It's just the rain." Then his lips formed a shy smile. "I want to take one of your flyers, if that's okay." She replied, "You're very kind," and gave him one of the papers she was still holding. "Unfortunately, though, I believe you are still too young to cast a ballot." Izuku picked up the flyer and took a quick look at it. It was an advertisement for the political campaign of the former principal of UA, who was now a mayoral candidate. "I'm not in agreement with him, but isn't it preferable to distribute them once the rain has stopped?" In an attempt to be courteous, Izuku inquired as to why she was out in such unfriendly weather. The woman laughed softly, but her face took on a somewhat dejected look. She sighed and said, "Now that I think about it, it must seem a bit suspicious. Simply put, We would consider it a huge accomplishment if the new mayor were one of our own. As the rain kept coming down, Izuku saw how her eyes strayed into the distance. Her voice carried a weight he could relate to, a sense of accumulated frustration and struggle. Heteromorphs are sometimes treated like second-class citizens, despite the fact that many of us have achieved significant positions in society. That change is something I'd like to see, she went on quietly, as though it were a deep-seated desire. Izuku remained silent for a while. Additionally, his eyes strayed to the horizon and the never-ending raindrops that were falling all around them. He understood her meaning perfectly. Not all men are made equal. I learned that truth about society when I was 4 years old, he recalled. At last, he broke the silence by saying, I understand. The woman gave him a startled look before beaming at him with a warm, sincere smile that seemed to brighten the dreary scene. She gave him a kind farewell after they had shared the rain in silence for a few more moments, and he waved as she left. Izuku held the flyer in his hand and stood in the rain for a moment longer, watching her vanish into the park's streets. Even though the rain kept coming down without stopping, he secretly hoped that the change they both desired would eventually materialize. Izuku loudly declared, I'm back, as he shut the door. He didn't find it odd that the house's lights weren't on. It's likely that his mother went out to get some dinner ingredients. The only sound to break the eerie stillness was the gentle patter of the rain outside. Izuku took off his soaked raincoat and let it air dry on the balcony. Before going to the shower, he took off his sopping wet clothes and threw them in the washing machine. His tense muscles from his long run in the rain were relieved by the hot water dripping over his skin. The tension of the day gradually dissipated, leaving him to think alone. He went to the kitchen after getting clean and putting on dry clothes, and he took a cold bottle of water out of the refrigerator. As he sipped, his eyes strayed around the empty room until he recalled his goal. After placing the bottle on the table, he took out his phone and looked up the official UA website. Even though he had read the instructions multiple times, he kept hoping that something new had been posted that would help him better prepare for the approaching entrance exam. Finding what he was looking for didn't take long. He took a seat on the couch in the living room and started reading intently. Candidates will be interviewed briefly regarding their reasons for wanting to be professional heroes, how they have developed their quirks, and how they have developed skills beyond their quirks. Additionally, they will take part in a series of physical examinations in which they can use their peculiarities to get the best score. At least one participant from each segment who places last will be eliminated and unable to take the entrance exam. But, if the judges think it necessary, entire blocks could also be disqualified if they don't live up to the director's standards. Izuku let the words sink in before lowering his phone gradually. The exam's pressure was evident. His stomach knotted at the thought that he might lose his chance to get into UA if he made one mistake. More than anything, he aspired to be a hero, but the road was getting more difficult by the day. He was startled out of his reverie by the sound of keys turning in the lock. Thanks for coming home, Izuku. But why are you sitting in the dark? His mother inquired as she went into the apartment and switched on the light in the living room. Izuku blinked, taken aback by how at ease he had become in the darkness. He smiled awkwardly and said, I must have forgotten. I was reading about the UA entrance exam's new procedure. His mother placed the shopping bags on the table and came over, interested. Is that it? She pointed to his phone and asked. Izuku gave it to her with a nod. He saw his mother start reading the same material he had just reviewed. Izuku lowered his eyes as she took in the information. He was aware that she had always been concerned about him, particularly now that he had rekindled his desire to be a hero. However, each new obstacle in the admissions process only increased his doubts about his capacity to realize that dream. Is that all? Izuku was taken aback by his mother's abrupt question, which was soft but full of resolve. She was on the edge of tears when he looked up, but her face was stern and full of unwavering determination. Although her hands shook a little, her voice was clearly strong. Izuku, you can succeed. She seemed to be trying to give him all of her confidence as she looked him in the eye. A lump appeared in Izuku's throat. He was soon overcome by emotions, and he had to suppress the tears that threatened to fall. Ultimately, though, his mother's words moved him so much that he couldn't help but smile. Yes. With a surge of energy in his body, he exclaimed, I'll give it my all, no matter what. They exchanged a look of understanding as they both nodded. Izuku felt a sense of certainty replace some of his doubts in that moment. Although he was aware that the path ahead would be difficult, he was no longer alone. She took a deep breath before continuing, saying, You know I'll be scared and worried about you all the time, but from now on, I'll support you in everything you decide to do. Izuku gazed admiringly at her. Although he was aware that she had always wished to keep him safe, He also realized that it was time for him to face his own challenges. Then one of the bags his mother had brought in began to be rummaged. She pulled out a dark green tracksuit with some yellow stripes and said, "I know it's a bit sudden, and I was planning to wrap it, but I don't see a better time to give it to you. You are expected to wear it on the day of the test." Astonished, Izuku took a moment to examine the ensemble. The colors were simple but had a special meaning, and it was just the right size for him. As he held the tracksuit in his hands, a sensation of warmth filled his chest. He looked at her gratefully and said, "It's perfect, Mom. Thank you." He only needed to see his mother's smile to know that he would continue to move forward despite any challenges that lay ahead. Every step Bakugo took splattered through the tiny puddles that covered the sidewalk as he moved down the street. His sour attitude was evident from his frown and clenched fists. He was holding a crumpled flyer in one hand, holding it so tightly that it appeared to be about to tear. He could still hear the last conversation he had overheard, the one his mother had with the doctor on speaker. The doctor said in a professional manner, "We're going to increase Katsuki's testosterone-suppressing dosage again, but this time, I also advise him to engage in an activity that doesn't involve fighting at least 3 times a week. Something to ease his tension, playing an instrument, perhaps." His only thought at the time was, nonsense, and it remains the same now as he pushes a music store door open with needless force. The girl behind the counter noticed the door slamming behind him and took off her headphones as soon as she saw him walk in. "Hello." But Bakugo interrupted her before she could finish. With an energy that radiated determination, he threw the crumpled flyer onto the counter without saying a word, crushing it in front of her. Jiro Kyoka turned to face him, clearly taken aback by the blonde's demeanor. "It says here that you're trying to find a drummer for your band," Bakugo said, his eyes burning with ambition. "Well, I'm here." His aggressiveness startled the girl, who blinked multiple times, but rather than retreating, she maintained her composure and allowed her surprise to subside. "Want to try it out?" she inquired, gesturing to the drum set that was ideally positioned in the shop's corner. Bakugo reluctantly nodded, as though the whole thing had been a waste of time. With resolute strides, he approached the drums, sat down, and seized the drumsticks with vigor, eager to demonstrate his abilities. He took a few deep breaths and started to play, and the sound of the drums filled the store. He seemed to have been born to play because of his precise and fluid movements. In addition to being powerful, the rhythms he produced had a controlled energy, as if he was directing all of his annoyance into every blow. Bakugo played as if the music were an extension of his own explosive personality, demonstrating that he was anything but a novice. Bakugo stopped after a few minutes that seemed longer than they actually were, his breathing a little labored and his muscles tense. He got up and gave Jiro the drumsticks, and Jiro was clearly impressed. "You are fantastic," she cried, finding it nearly impossible to comprehend what she had just heard. Bakugo replied haughtily, letting the drumsticks fall to the counter, "As if I needed someone to tell me that." Still taken aback but amused by his demeanor, Jiro grinned. She snatched up a piece of paper and quickly wrote down an address. She handed him the note and said, "Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, from 3 to 5. Bakugo didn't even bother to thank her, instead taking it hard. "Well done." He snarled and turned to go. Nevertheless, he stopped at the door and gave her a smug, sideways smile before leaving. "Oh, and don't fall in love with me, please. I'm out the instant I feel like a confession is imminent." Jiro frowned, a little irritated, as he looked at him, completely taken aback by the remark. "Obviously not. Music is the focus of this band, not dating," she said firmly, crossing her arms. "Well done," Bakugo retorted, pleased with her answer. With the crumpled paper still in his hand, he hurried out of the store without saying another word, just as determined as when he had first arrived. With a faint smile on her face from the unusual but intense encounter, Jiro watched him vanish down the street before putting her headphones back on and going back to her magazine. Midoriya was standing at a street corner, waiting calmly. The full moon was visible, and the sky had cleared. After raining all day, the weather was generally pleasant, albeit a little chilly. Todoroki joined him and said, "I'm sorry to see you so late, Midoriya. I was asked to go to Recovery Girl's funeral by my father. I didn't want to accompany him, but he pointed to his eye and said, 'My sister reminded me that she helped me heal my injury.'" "I get it. Todoroki, don't worry about it." The two of them set off down the damp streets. "Did you visit these public baths for a particular reason?" Midoriya inquired, interrupting their quiet. Todoroki continued to look forward. "Yes, well, at least my father won't be here to interrupt us again. I suppose my home isn't the best place for a private discussion either." They reached the door and Midoriya nodded, with my mom coming in and out, always offering you food. In addition, it appears to be a serene location. The reviews say so. Todoroki answered, looking at his phone. This is what friends do, according to what I read online. Then they went inside. Noticing that no one was around to listen, Todoroki carried on his conversation while they waited for the elderly woman, who appeared to be a little hard of hearing and moved slowly, to tend to them. At today's ceremony, I never saw my father go up to All Might, Todoroki said softly. Additionally, I didn't see any indications of discomfort between them, which leads me to believe that my father hasn't yet discussed Dabi's demands that my mother be returned. For a moment, Midoriya considered it. Midoriya noted, I guess that makes sense, considering that your father can't agree to that. In any case, I would appreciate it if you would keep this information confidential going forward, especially from Mr. Yagi, your mom, and your construction friend. Why him in particular? For a brief moment, there was only the distant sound of hot water flowing through the establishment's pipes to break the silence between them. Todoroki thought back to the time he had asked that man who he was, when the streetlight had gone out and then come back on, and the man had vanished. Don't you find it odd that a man is so interested in you? Todoroki inquired in a suspicious tone. Do you not believe he has a secret agenda? Midoriya instantly shook his head. I highly doubt it. I believe he merely has a strong desire to assist me. I feel more trustworthy when I see him smile, for some reason. He seems to be encouraging me and assuring me that everything will be all right. Todoroki said nothing as he considered what Midoriya had said. The elderly attendant finally came over before he could reply, apologized for keeping them waiting, and led them to the bathroom. I'm shocked that our umbrellas were taken. Who would act in that manner? Uraraka inquired, a little uneasy in her damp attire. Though she was still dripping with water, Kami said without much thought, probably some mischievous guy. And it didn't really help that car that just went by. She pointed to the place across the street and said, perhaps we should take a bath. Uraraka concurred, saying, I think that's the best idea before we catch a cold. The air was filled with gentle steam, which made them both feel calm as they stepped inside. Looking around, Midoriya said, what luck, it seems like we're the only ones here. His voice reverberated faintly off the marble walls, enveloping them in a comfortable sense of seclusion. Before going into the water, he prepared for the grooming ritual by settling into one of the seats. After remaining silent for a moment longer, Todoroki finally sat down next to him. The seriousness on his face seemed even more intense in the steam. His eyes remained gloomy for some reason, as though the words he was going to tell Midoriya carried more weight than usual. Todoroki said in a low, almost aloof voice, so, now I can tell you what I wanted to share last night. Water trickled down his forehead and onto his damp hair as he ran a hand through it before it hit the ground. Seeing the tension emanating from his friend, Midoriya cast a sidelong glance at him. I'm not sure how you'll react, but feel free to express yourself. With the soap in his lap, Midoriya turned to face Todoroki. The hazy words from the night before came back to him. But more than his curiosity, he was worried about Todoroki and the impact this was having on him. You mentioned yesterday that it's about something awful your mother may have done, Midoriya said quietly, attempting to summarize what little he knew. I'm not sure what it might be, but wouldn't it be preferable to hold off until you can get her to personally confirm it? Todoroki's face briefly displayed astonishment, as if he hadn't considered that. Is it possible that I won't see her again? Todoroki appeared distressed as he balled his fists on his thighs. Even though Midoriya knew his friend was already more than clean, he decided not to call attention to the fact that he was finally cracking and instead kept scrubbing with the soap. You must have faith that everything will work out, Todoroki, Midoriya said, his voice full of understanding and hope. The fact that you want to confide in me says a lot, even though I'm not sure if what you have to say has an impact on me personally. It indicates to me that you're a close friend. Todoroki lapsed into contemplation. Kami let the warm water run over her skin as she slowly moved the soap across her back. She stopped to examine herself in the mirror, which was starting to get foggy from the steam, with an inquisitive look. As she examined her reflection, her fingers lingered on her shoulder, dropping the soap without even noticing. Her face, her hair. The composed demeanor she had perfected to hide her true emotions from others. Leaning slightly forward, she squinted to see that the image staring back at her was familiar. She broke the silence with a gentle but profound voice, saying, Ochako. Have you ever had the feeling that you are not who you are? That question resonated inside Uraraka, who was submerged in the water up to her shoulders across the bath. Her mind was suddenly filled with memories of her recent dreams, particularly those in which Deku was very close to her. Yes, she answered at last. That's how I've been feeling lately, actually. Kami looked away from her reflection, a small smile on her lips as she washed the soap away with water, letting the cool feeling attempt to calm the jumbled feelings churning inside her head. She said with a smile that seemed to convey a sense of calm amidst the chaos, "I knew you would understand. I am so happy that we are friends. But I'm not sure if we're discussing the same thing," Uraraka remarked, her cheeks blushing slightly. Kami, obviously intrigued, raised an eyebrow. She tilted her head slightly and leaned closer to the water's edge with her customary grace. "Then just tell me," she said in a tone that was both playful and inquisitive. A knot formed in Uraraka's throat. Even with someone like Kami, who always seemed so open, this wasn't an easy conversation to have, but something about the laid-back vibe of the bath gave her a little more confidence to talk. "Have you ever, Kami, have a dream about a man?" Her face flushed completely with embarrassment as she hesitantly asked the question. It took Kami just a few seconds to figure out what Uraraka was saying. She crossed her arms and smiled mischievously, relishing her friend's hesitation. "A lustful dream about a man?" She posed the question directly, allowing her words to flow freely. Uraraka's eyes went wide with surprise. "Oh, you said it," she cried, her astonishment evident in every move. Kami chuckled quietly. As she joined her in the water, making tiny ripples on the surface, she responded, "Haha, you're so cute, Ochako," with a playful sparkle in her eyes. Both of them were surrounded by the warm, soothing water, but Uraraka felt the temperature increase by a few degrees. Every subsequent word made her already red face worse. "Has it never happened to you before?" Kami inquired, sounding more inquisitive and gentle, as though she truly wanted to comprehend her friend. In an attempt to cool the heat in her cheeks, Uraraka sank a little deeper into the water and shook her head slowly, avoiding direct eye contact. "Is it about the guy you like, though?" Kami persisted, cocking her head slightly and grinning more sympathetically. Unable to contain herself, Uraraka nodded. She didn't need to say anything more, but the words stuck in her throat. Her expression and the silence she maintained spoke volumes. "I see nothing wrong with that." Kami closed her eyes and leaned back carelessly against the tub's edge, as though they were discussing a trivial topic. "I dreamed that I was wearing a tight black suit with the first guy the first liked. I put myself against his back, pinned him to the ground, and spoke in his ear in hushed tones. Though he didn't appear particularly joyful." She paused for a second, giggling. "I suppose I've always been a little ahead of my time because that was a long time ago." Uraraka was taken aback by how earnestly she said it, and the memory of that scene made her blush even more. There was something unsettling and reassuring about the naturalness with which Kami spoke, as though such confessions were not a cause for embarrassment. It gave her a sense of relief and let her know that, despite their differing experiences, she wasn't the only one feeling those things. But Uraraka thought for a moment before answering, trying to find the right words to convey her true feelings. Finally, with a slight smile on her lips but a hint of vulnerability in her eyes, she said, "Thank you for not making me feel weird about this. Knowing that I'm not the only one with these gives me comfort. Odd dreams. Thank you for sharing something so intimate with me." She tried to calm the agitation that was still present in her by placing a hand on her chest, but she was unable to control the somewhat dejected expression that appeared on her face. "That's all. I used to believe I knew myself," she added, her voice now softer. "I assumed that when I had feelings for someone, my thoughts about them would be more honorable. When I have those dreams and think of him in that way, I feel like I'm not myself. In particular, because he is too sweet and cute." She tried to hide how much it affected her by narrowing her eyes and staring at the ceiling. "A cute boy. Well, they say those are usually the ones who are most repressed and end up being the most perverted," said Kami humorously. "Deku is not a pervert at all." Uraraka's face flushed even more as her voice, a swift retort, came out almost unconsciously. The idea of picturing Deku in that manner seemed unthinkable. "Deku?" Kami reiterated, a curious smile spreading across her face. "What a sweet moniker." She took a moment to process. "However, he most likely has his own sexy dreams if he is a typical 15 or 16-year-old boy and is close to you." "Not possible," Uraraka yelled, unable to control the instant denial that escaped her mouth. Kami laughed quietly, not in jest, but because she found her friend's heightened response amusing. As though her comment were a casual remark with a much sharper undertone, Kami said, "Looks like you have a lot of faith in him," while glancing at her nails. Uraraka's heart was pounding, but she responded firmly, "That's right," as though her declaration of trust betrayed something more profound. "All right. Kami lifted her hands in a friendly surrender gesture and began sprinkling water on Uraraka's back. She closed her eyes at the spray, appreciating the change in tone of their conversation. Forget what I said. Uraraka's thoughts drifted for a while. The image of Deku smiling appeared in her mind, that sweet and genuine smile she had always admired. She recalled the first time she had been struck by how lovely his smile was. Now, in an attempt to dispel any doubts Kami had sown, she reminded herself that someone with that face could not possibly think such things. If you consider it, Kami said abruptly and unusually gravely, it's kind of like how some villains must feel. Possessing thoughts or desires that trouble them and cause them to commit crimes. Uraraka opened her eyes, somewhat taken aback by the shift in tone as Kami's words reverberated in her head. Uraraka responded, her voice now firmer and tinged with determination, but if someone can't control themselves and ends up committing a crime, they'll have to face the consequences. She seemed to have a strong emotional connection to what she said. Kami ceased splattering water on her back and became quiet for a while. She stared at her own hand, which was melting oddly, as though the skin's texture was disappearing before her eyes. She just observed the phenomenon with a slight smile, though, and didn't appear to be bothered. Kami whispered, her voice becoming slightly sharper, a tone that sent chills down Uraraka's spine. Only someone who has gone through something terrible could understand how hard it is to restrain oneself. Ochako, I believe you don't understand. Uraraka shuddered at the strange inflection Kami used when she pronounced her name. A sudden uneasiness in the air caused her to turn slowly. Kami. They had just entered the water when Midoriya and Todoroki heard a scream. What was it? Midoriya inquired, his tone a mixture of alertness and worry. Todoroki frowned as he raised his eyes to the wall that divided the spaces. There was a flicker of suspicion in his eyes, but he answered calmly as usual, I'm not sure. I believe it originated with the women. I thought I heard, Taga. The name was so familiar that it momentarily paralyzed Midoriya, echoing in his mind like a ringing bell. Then, as though time had stopped, a particular memory came to him. The moment he was falling headfirst and heard Uraraka frantically yelling Toga's name. Uraraka. With wide eyes, Midoriya yelled and jumped out of the water, causing a lot of splashing. The tense scene by the pool was ominously contrasted with the gentle sound of water dripping. As if her soul had momentarily departed her body, Uraraka lay unconscious, her face pallid. Her vital fluid was slowly pouring into the glass container as Toga, who was crouching next to her, handled a tiny vial attached to Uraraka's leg. Toga's grin, which was filled with twisted joy and satisfaction, was unnerving. I'm sorry, Toga whispered, almost as though she was sincerely sorry. I believe that last time I didn't draw enough blood from that girl. However, I will not repeat that error. Uraraka remained still, trapped in the unconsciousness that prevented her from realizing the deadly danger she was in, while the vial continued to drain, sucking the essence out of her. Fascinated by the rich red hue that was building up in the glass, Toga's eyes glistened as she observed the constant flow of blood. The thrill of feeling so close to Uraraka, that connection to her life, was a peculiar combination of obsession and love. However, a sound from outside interrupted her focus. A worried-sounding male voice reverberated through the onsen's intimate silence. How are you? From the opposite side, the boy inquired. Screams were heard. With a hint of annoyance in her eyes, Toga scowled. She was aware that her time was limited. She got to her feet slowly, taking one last glance at the blood she had gathered. Happy with her harvest, she muttered to herself, looks like this will have to be enough. Her face lit up with a smile as the flask glowed with the red liquid. Her expression changed to one of mischief and sadness as she then turned to face Uraraka. Perhaps. Leaning toward Uraraka's body, she whispered, perhaps a little air desperation will make you feel what I feel, Ochako. Even though it was only for a short time, I really enjoyed being friends again, and I'm sorry it had to be this way. She lifted her leg with icy coldness and kicked Uraraka into the pool with precise force while singing, bye-bye. No one is responding. Todoroki verified. I'm feeling uneasy. With his fists clenched, Midoriya declared, I'm going in. Todoroki trailed behind Midoriya, who hurried inside while partially shielding his eyes. A girl let out a high-pitched scream to greet them. I apologize, we simply wanted to see how you were doing, Midoriya expressed regret immediately. He covered his eyes with his fingers to block out the parts he shouldn't see, and to his surprise, the girl who had screamed was now grinning in a way that didn't seem quite right. What am I observing? One with bruises, one with a scar. I think this is a dream. Look at the floor, Midoriya, Todoroki muttered. Bloodstains were present. As he uncovered his face, Midoriya briefly forgot his embarrassment due to the girl's peculiar demeanor and the sight of blood. "Where is Uraraka?" he insisted. "Oh, you, Deku. Are you acquainted with her?" Midoriya shook his head in irritation when Todoroki asked. He couldn't see Uraraka, but the fact that she addressed him by his nickname indicated that he must be close by. "You resemble my first love quite a bit. I think you would look even more awesome if you were bleeding, even though you might already be cuter," Toga yelled, charging at them brandishing a knife. Toga appeared to have foreseen Todoroki's move, but he reacted swiftly, hitting her wrist to disarm her. She spun quickly and slipped between them, out of their grasp. As he watched her back away, Todoroki acknowledged, "She's fast. Give me a call," Toga shouted while sprinting away nude while holding her clothing in one hand. "I'll pursue her. You look for your friend here," Todoroki made a snap decision. As he looked around, Midoriya's heart raced until he saw bubbles forming in the water. He jumped mindlessly into the pool and quickly dragged Uraraka's lifeless body out, placing her next to the edge. "Uraraka! Uraraka!" But there was no answer when he called out. He began applying chest compressions, hardly realizing she was fully nude, recalling his resuscitation notes from one of his notebooks. Then he did the best he could to give her mouth to mouth. "Uraraka!" After the third try, he called again, almost desperate. No, he was unable to let her go, due to. She coughed and fought to breathe again as she abruptly released the water from her lungs. "Uraraka!" Midoriya gave her a tight hug and let out a cry that nearly brought tears to her eyes. From Uraraka's perspective, the first thing she saw when she started to regain consciousness was Deku separating from her and gently placing her on the ground. She quickly realized that Deku was only wearing a towel around his waist and that she was completely nude. They looked at each other for a moment. Todoroki went outside and looked around in all directions. Todoroki repeated his admission, "She's too fast," as he was gasping for air when he heard a loud slap coming from inside. With everyone appropriately attired and already on the street, Uraraka bowed deeply before Deku. He began waving his hands right away, telling her to stop. "Pardon me, please," Uraraka said gravely. No, it was my fault," Deku said tremblingly. "When I realized you could breathe, I should have departed immediately." "Is it still painful?" Uraraka asked, putting a gentle hand on Deku's cheek without touching him with all 5 fingers. "You were already injured from the fight with Bakugo." Deku tried to endure the delicate gesture because it felt good in some way, even though it made his heart race right away. He hesitated for a second, not knowing if he should turn away or let himself get lost in the warmth. However, Todoroki, who had been watching in silence, began to move away before he could make up his mind. "However, Todoroki!" Midoriya shouted as she saw him go. Todoroki came to a halt and turned in their direction. "I have to go home. My father will cause a commotion if I don't." Recalling the unfinished conversation they had had, Deku pressed his lips together. "However, what you intended to tell me." As the wind played with his two-toned hair, Todoroki gave him a serene, almost resigned look. The bright blue expanse stretched endlessly above Midoriya as he raised his eyes to the sky. He followed the path of a dandelion seed that was carried past his eyes by a light breeze, fascinated by the almost hypnotic movement of the tiny floating piece of life. He reached out and carefully caught it between his fingers without giving it much thought. He grinned at that brief encounter with nature, interpreted it as a sign, and started stretching before returning to his work. According to remarks made by former pupils of Professor Aizawa, if the data he discovered online was correct, some of the physical examinations that might be required prior to the test might be the dash of 50 meters. Carrying one sandbag at a time, Deku ran back and forth. Long jump. With buckets full of supplies, Deku leapt over the bridge's fractured opening. Tossing. His peculiar behavior, which occasionally appeared a little erratic as he attempted to manage too much at once, became apparent to the construction workers. One of the men yelled, "Hey, kid, take it easy," in a rough but worried voice. His co-worker next to him added, "Let him do what he wants," but his tone was more humorous. "Well, but," he was elbowed by the man beside him, who whispered softly, "Has the boss's daughter's gaze on him caught your attention? One day, I wouldn't be shocked if this young person became the company's owner. We'd better keep him on our side from the beginning." As soon as he nodded, the first employee's face changed to one of mild amusement. After noticing their looks, Midoriya returned their smiles with a bewildered expression. "Sorry, did you say something?" she asked. "No, absolutely nothing. Go on, child. Put forth a lot of effort," they urged him, saying it almost simultaneously. Bakugo continued to stir the cement mixture he had been given while glaring at him from the side. Bakugo, wow. Uraraka said as she walked past, the mix appears flawless. Bakugo glanced at her, obviously irritated by the unexpected praise. What makes it so remarkable? He snarled. It isn't all that dissimilar from cooking. Anyone can do it. Surprised, Uraraka blinked. You cook? Suyu added. Never would have guessed, having come up without Bakugo noticing. One day, you should make something for us to try, Mina, who appeared to be listening to the conversation while working, added. Watching them with a mixture of surprise and interest was Midoriya, who had heard some of the conversation from a distance. Right, Kachan's been really popular with the girls lately. He unconsciously looked at Uraraka, who was laughing idly next to Bakugo, for a little longer than he should have. He felt something stirring inside of him, but he was unable to identify it. Return to work and stop wasting time, Bakugo yelled, obviously uneasy with the attention. The girls dispersed at his acerbic tone. Hurry up. Don't be so sullen. Uraraka smiled and lightly tapped his arm before leaving, but Bakugo did not respond. Bakugo kept stirring the mixture with his typical expression, but all of a sudden a childhood memory came flooding back. His father remarked, Katsuki, you can now add the noodles. Yay. He smiled slightly, a gesture so faint it was hardly perceptible, at the innocent thought of himself yelling with delight as he assisted in the kitchen. Seeing it, however, Deku, who had been observing him the entire time, felt a burden in his chest. What was the reason behind his smile? Would Kachan be able to smile like that without making fun of anyone? Bakugo turned his head at that moment and saw Midoriya looking at him. After a brief moment of eye contact, Bakugo frowned and grunted in irritation, obviously annoyed by the unwelcome attention. Deku felt uncomfortable and immediately went back to his exercises in an attempt to block out the confusion he was experiencing. Hey, don't you guys think we ought to assist in the reconciliation between Bakugo and Midoriya? Observing their most recent exchange, Hagakure inquired. They don't even talk to each other anymore after what happened. Ojiro nodded reflectively. It's a little depressing, isn't it? They attend the same school, have known one another since childhood, and both aspire to enroll at UA. Instead of avoiding conversation, they ought to be encouraging one another. Kirishima shrugged, having also observed the separation between the two. Yeah, I wouldn't try getting in between those two, she said. They should, in my opinion, handle it on their own, at their own pace. Uraraka, who had been paying close attention, nodded in agreement. Yeah, I believe that fight was somewhat like a conversation between them without words. Before the words can actually move forward, they must settle for a while. You guys know them better, Ojiro said, acknowledging their perspective. I suppose you're correct. After a brief period of silence, Mina, who is always full of energy, broke the silence. Speaking of getting to know one another better, she began with a cheeky grin. When Uraraka saw it coming, her mind started to raise alarms. Before the conversation could get awkward, Uraraka hurriedly said, Oh, sorry, Mina, I think my dad's calling me. Mina continued to smile as she watched her go. So, she said, laughing, that's how she wants to play it. With a mixture of nervousness and interest, Kirishima gazed at her. Hey, what's up with you? You sound more like a villain now. Don't promise me you will. Oh, don't worry. Mina winked and said, it's just that some people need a little push in the right direction. Wiping the perspiration from his brow, Midoriya took a seat for a moment. His muscles were beginning to ache. For a moment, he let the cool breeze soothe him by closing his eyes. But before he could unwind completely, he saw that the sunlight above him was obscured by a shadow. When he opened his eyes, Uraraka was standing in front of him, smiling warmly and holding a water bottle. Well done today, Deku, she said, extending the bottle to him. Startled by the gesture, Midoriya blinked but couldn't help but smile in return as he accepted the bottle with gratitude. He replied, feeling relieved by her generosity, thanks, Uraraka. Any odd thoughts he might have had about Uraraka and Kachan were erased in that instant, and he felt foolish for even thinking about them. Following their morning shift at the construction site, the group of volunteers was making their way to the train station. Some of them walked slowly, showing signs of exhaustion, but the lively conversation that broke out between them kept the mood light. As he adjusted his backpack on his shoulder, Kirishima, who was always the first to break the silence with an enthusiastic comment, spoke with excitement. Have any of you heard? Actors are being hired to take part in a section of the UA entrance exam, he started. Bakugo, who was a few paces behind the group, heard the conversation and scowled. He kept his distance, but he couldn't resist listening in. For what purpose would they be? Ojiro pondered as he walked beside him. Perhaps for a rescue emergency situation? Midoriya's eyes brightened as he made a guess. Or perhaps to mimic a scene of a crime, or maybe. At that moment, he took out his notebook and began to mumble as he hurriedly scribbled notes, his ideas spilling onto the pages. His friends were used to seeing him lose himself in his own world whenever something about heroes or training excited him, so they were no longer surprised by his habit. Midoriya's distraction didn't stop Ojiro from speaking. As a teacher, I've heard that last year, the current principal dismissed a whole class because he didn't think they had potential. Last year, there was no Class 1B because of this. Uraraka appeared visibly surprised as he walked close to Tsuyu. That seems a bit extreme, she said, widened her eyes in surprise. In her typical neutral yet scathing tone, Tsuyu suggested, perhaps it's just a rumor the principal spread himself to build a reputation of being tough. Uraraka nodded repeatedly because he wanted to accept that explanation, but the others didn't seem to share his conviction. Something in the air caused them to become a little concerned. That kind of uncertainty only made the already challenging UA entrance exam more stressful. Ojiro crossed his arms. The previous system made it seem difficult enough to get into UA. We might not all be able to make it. The group fell silent as a result of his remark, and even Midoriya, who had briefly paused his writing, lowered his head. He was aware that many believed he faced the most difficult task ahead, even though no one expressed this directly. After all, it seemed impossible to pass a hero exam without a quirk. Ever the optimist, Kirishima attempted to lighten the tense situation with a smile. But it's definitely worth a shot. He cried out. You would be the first since All Might, Midoriya, if you could enter without a quirk. On the day of the test, a quirk that I had heard about in his generation materialized, and he was accepted. Midoriya smiled gently. I've also heard that. Without much enthusiasm, he answered, but honestly, I think it's just an urban legend. Mina, who is always direct and lighthearted, came over to Midoriya with a lot of energy and grabbed his arm before the conversation could go any further. Both Kirishima and Uraraka gave her a quick glance, but their responses to the gesture differed. Midoriya, it still amazes me that you don't have a quirk. You do a great job hiding it, Mina remarked, her eyes glimmering with interest. She leaned slightly closer to him as she spoke, which made Midoriya uneasy and uncertain of how to respond. The interrogation is about to begin, Kirishima thought, squinting. The sudden intimacy between Mina and Midoriya made Midoriya uneasy. Mina either didn't notice or maybe did, but didn't care that he could feel her chest against his arm. He tried to explain, hesitating. It's because of Hatsume, a bright girl. With her inventions, she has been assisting me. Midoriya quickly revealed his gloves. She wants to enroll in UA as well, but in the support course. To work on innovations, we get together once a week. Uraraka felt a little uneasy and clenched her fists gently in front of her chest when she heard that. She was troubled by the idea of Deku seeing Hatsume so frequently, but she wasn't sure why. Somehow, that bothers me. So clever, eh? Mina gave a cheeky smile. Do you also think she's cute? Midoriya stiffened, his face beginning to redden. In addition to the question itself, he was anxious because he knew Uraraka was listening, which caused him to feel a peculiar mixture of embarrassment and anxiety. Well, do you like her? Better yet, tell me. Mina leaned slightly closer and pressed. To Mina's surprise, Midoriya became thoughtful rather than blushing as she had anticipated. His gaze lingered on a far-off object before he spoke in a soothing voice. Hatsume is undoubtedly excellent. From the start, she embraced me for who I am, but she is just a friend to me. Additionally, I believe she views me as the ideal test subject for her creations. Hatsume worked on, listening through the transmitter built into Midoriya's gloves in a workshop crammed with devices and prototypes. Even after hearing her name mentioned, she didn't flinch, her focus was unwavering. In contrast, Uraraka experienced a sudden sense of relief. Hearing Deku's words made her smile a little, even though she wasn't sure why she had been so anxious. But Mina noticed right away. So, Midoriya, who do you like? She inquired with a playful smile. Well. Midoriya's expression grew even more tense. He didn't look at Uraraka because he knew that he would instantly reveal himself if he did. At least for the time being, he wasn't sure whether he should come clean about it or keep it a secret. Tsuyu intervened at the ideal time. She said, I don't think we should question him. The individual in question, Ribbit, should be the first to know who he likes. Always a romantic, Hagakure concurred. That's right, the sweetest thing is that. To everyone's surprise, Midoriya took a deep breath and smiled, albeit a little uneasy. "It's no problem," he said in a composed yet determined tone. "That individual is already aware. I'm just awaiting her response, but I swear I'll tell you everything if it goes well." Mina, taken aback by his straightforward reply, finally let him go. The others grinned in relief at Midoriya's sudden maturity. "Congratulations, Midoriya." Kirishima applauded and yanked him into a headlock so tight that Midoriya almost stumbled. "Real men do it that way." Mina looked at Kirishima playfully, not wanting to be left out. "Perhaps you ought to take a lesson from him." What are you discussing?" As the tension in the air subsided, Kirishima laughed. Bakugo complained, taking rapid steps in the direction of the station, which was now visible. What a load of crap. Knowing they would see each other again soon, the group bid each other farewell. While walking next to Ashido, Kirishima briefly turned back to watch Bakugo before turning to face Uraraka and Midoriya, who were both traveling to the same train station. Kirishima said, scratching his head, "That makes sense. Bakugo dislikes these types of discussions." However, that response might also result from. Mina teased, pointing to Bakugo, Uraraka, and Midoriya with her fingers in an imaginary triangle. "Hey, stop dreaming of strange things that will never happen," Kirishima suggested. "That will not benefit you in any way. Believe me." Bakugo, Midoriya, and Uraraka were all in the same train car. With her head bobbing, Uraraka appeared to be fighting sleep while she sat. Bakugo faced the opposite door, either absorbed in the scenery or, depending on one's perspective, simply observing the reflection of the train's interior, while Midoriya stood in front of her. Uncomfortable, Midoriya asked himself. What made him feel so on edge around Kacchan? He took a half step to the left without really realizing it, just enough to block out Uraraka's reflection in the window from Kacchan's position. Bakugo, meanwhile, was craving spaghetti and meatballs for supper, something he could prepare himself, as the train went by a cookware store. Perhaps he would surprise his mother before she returned from her job. He could already visualize it. The words, "This crap is better than mine," would come out of his mother's mouth. There was a brief smile on his face. Where in hell did that idea originate? He asked himself, perplexed and then annoyed. It was most likely the nonsense his mother was constantly putting on him. He could not allow it to go on. He would become as weak and pitiful as someone he knew too well if he let his guard down. Despite a chill running down his spine, Midoriya chose not to allow himself to be intimidated when he felt Kacchan's eyes suddenly on him. Though still half asleep, Uraraka muttered, "Looks like the next stop is yours." Midoriya smiled kindly at her. Naturally, getting up early in the train's warmth occasionally made you want to fall asleep. "You are correct. Avoid dozing off, Uraraka," he said, his typical nervousness coming through. "Well, see you later." However, Midoriya leaned down, reached out, and gently took one of the long strands of her hair in an almost unthinking moment of impulse. Carefully, he lifted it to his lips and kissed it lightly. Uraraka's cheeks turned a deep red as the brief gesture was filled with tenderness. Incredulous at his audacity, Midoriya's own heart pounded, but there was no time to think about it. He started walking toward the door across from Bakugo on his own. Unintentionally, he cast a quick glance toward his childhood friend, who was looking back at him with a mixture of confusion and poorly concealed anger. When the train arrived at the station, the two boys left, going in different directions. However, at the school's entrance, their paths crossed once more. Just before Midoriya entered, Bakugo caught up to him and walked beside him for a brief moment, as though the silence between them was more profound than usual. "Hey, nerd." Midoriya looked at Bakugo in surprise when his voice sounded harsher than he had intended. Bakugo went on. "Without waiting, you should put her out of your mind if you want to have any chance of getting into UA. Women are trouble." Bakugo continued to walk without waiting for an answer, leaving Midoriya motionless as he took in the information. What had he said? It was nonsensical and didn't even sound like something Bakugo would typically say in such a casual manner. Bakugo, walking further ahead, also wondered why the hell he had said that. "I think you're right. When this is all over, I'll tell you. I hope everything works out." Midoriya grinned. "All right," he said at last. "I'll take Uraraka home on foot." Todoroki looked at them one last time and nodded. "Take caution. The crazies seem to be appearing everywhere." Deku replied in a serious tone, "Yeah, you too." Uraraka and Deku walked side by side down a nearly empty street, where tiny puddles were still shimmering in the faint streetlights. The soft breeze and serene surroundings stood in stark contrast to the intense dialogue they were having. Is it true that the girl has a talent that allows her to change into people whose blood she consumes? Deku summarized, his tone containing both wonder and anxiety. Uraraka gave a gentle nod. She told me she was born without a quirk when we first met, she started, her eyes straying into her memories. It seems that her parents forced her to claim she didn't have one in order to conceal her odd talent for maintaining appearances. Deku scowled as he considered the circumstances. Midoriya assumed, I suppose she must have been bullied for feigning not to have a quirk. Not really. Uraraka gave a small shrug. She was kind of overlooked. She was always intensely focused on her studies and never smiled. She didn't seem particularly noteworthy at first. But I got to know her a little better after we became friends one day. There was a quiet between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet where Deku's mind was full of questions and unspoken thoughts. One in particular had been bothering him for a while, and he knew that this quiet moment was the ideal opportunity to bring it up, even though he didn't want to upset Uraraka. Uraraka. He started reluctantly, does she have anything to do with the reason you saved my life on our first day together? Uraraka's expression stayed solemn, as though she had foreseen the inquiry. Yes. She answered. At our school, Himiko Toga developed an obsession with a boy who was a lot like you, Deku. She attempted to smile as she spoke, but it came out shattered and composed. I was unaware for a while of the depth of her obsession and the depth of that feeling. When I did, it was too late. Is it too late? He inquired, although he was somewhat afraid of the response. With every word pressing down on her like a burden, Uraraka explained. Toga told him how she felt, but he rejected her. Then she changed into him, took his blood, and leapt from the roof of the school. I believe. If she couldn't have the person she loved on her terms, she wanted to kill them symbolically. Her words conjured up a terrible picture in Deku's mind. With a mixture of hopelessness and insanity, he could picture Toga, changed into her obsession, plunging into the emptiness. The expression in Uraraka's eyes, however, was what really got to him. Something deeper was reflected in them, a memory that still troubled her. Uraraka recalled the bloody, partially disfigured body on the ground and how she had knelt in front of her friend, believing that if it meant saving her, she would give her all the blood she had. Uraraka went on to say that she attempted to describe to me what it was like to be in love with someone just before that. I believed she was using metaphors when she talked about aspiring to be like the person you love. I answered from my own point of view, but perhaps if I had made a greater effort to comprehend her. Recalling his own difficulties with Kachan, Deku attempted to reassure her, saying, it's difficult to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Uraraka nodded, but the guilt was still in her eyes. For Toga, drinking his blood and becoming the person she liked was the pinnacle of her love. Why? To be honest, I'm still unsure, and I believe that was the primary cause of her attack on me today. She rubbed the area of her neck where she had been struck because I couldn't understand her. However, I don't believe she intended to murder me. When he saw the pain in Uraraka's movements, Deku's concern grew. The idea of her being harmed and them doing nothing about it was too much for him to handle. We ought to visit the hospital and have you examined. He grabbed her hand tightly and cried out in alarm. Why I didn't think of it sooner is beyond me. Uraraka glanced at him, taken aback by his abrupt response. But the warmth of his touch calmed her in a way she hadn't experienced since they had first spoken. She wasn't prepared for the comfort that came from the strength with which he held her hand, as though he didn't want to let go. Don't worry, Deku. Actually, it's only a bump, but thank you, she said in a whisper, holding his hand tightly. She could tell Deku was still concerned by the way he gazed at her, as though he would insist on taking her to the hospital if she showed any signs of weakness. However, he chose to believe Uraraka was capable. As for her, she still felt that the events had dulled her senses a little. Nevertheless, knowing that she could not further embarrass herself, she permitted herself to hold the hand that joined them with the other. With a gentle smile, she whispered, I'm glad you were there to save me again. Instead of feeling uneasy about the intimacy, Midoriya was enthralled by the warmth in her voice, which was reminiscent of the way he had felt with Fuyumi when she had asked him to continue being friends with her brother. With genuineness in his voice and a promise he had no intention of breaking in his eyes, he said, I'll always be there to protect you, Uraraka. Recalling the pledge they had made outside the police station when chaos had just started to take over their lives, Uraraka kept her smile. I hope so, she said quietly, in a firm yet kind tone. I wouldn't want my first kiss to go to anyone else. Understanding that she was referring to when he had given her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, the scene came rushing back to his mind with almost painful clarity, and although his body betrayed him, blushing all the way to his ears, he didn't let that make him release Uraraka's hand. He didn't want to lose the warmth he experienced from that simple touch. Uraraka's lovely brown eyes seemed to sparkle with a unique quality. With a smile that was a mixture of shyness and tenderness, Uraraka added, "I'm glad it was with the person I like." Midoriya's heart skipped a beat, pounding so hard it almost hurt. His entire body seemed to be reacting to those words. His hands began to perspire, his ears burned, and the butterflies in his stomach flitted wildly. He was overcome by the rush of emotions, but in spite of the intensity of the situation, he stayed motionless, absorbed in the thoughts that were racing through his head. But since she didn't see any response from her perspective, Uraraka plucked up the courage to repeat it, making sure that her declaration was clear. "Deku, I like you." Midoriya felt a lot of things again, but they were hidden from view, so he just stared off into space. What does she have to say? How could someone like me be liked by someone as great as Uraraka? He pondered, his thoughts descending into incredulity. The hit must have confused her. Yes, that must be the case. However, Uraraka took a few steps forward, released his hand gently, and then turned to face him before he could express his doubts. With a slightly anxious expression, she held her wrist behind her back. "I know it must sound strange to tell you this in light of everything that has transpired," she said in a tremulous whisper. Deku finally reacted as though something had suddenly occurred to him. "You're not strange." The urgency of someone who didn't want a single word to be misinterpreted, he cried out. "You're courageous and strong. Additionally, your hairstyle. It's ideal for you. You're also honest, kind, and—" "I didn't see that coming," she interrupted, blushing and squinting as she felt like crying but wasn't sure how to handle it. "As this? How did he reject me?" But Deku went on, his voice trembling but determined, before that thought could take root in her heart. "What I mean is, Uraraka, it's impossible for me to dislike you." Gently, he took the hand she had held behind her back and moved closer to her. He said, his nerves jangling, "Now that I think about it, I think I've been in love with you from the beginning." Uraraka gave him a sidelong glance before attempting to smile while wiping away a tear with her other hand. I felt a sense of relief. She had been frightened for a moment. "I took a little longer to become aware of my emotions." In a quiet voice, she confessed. "However, I couldn't stop thinking about you after our date, when I saw you smile for the first time." "My grin?" Midoriya was taken aback. She confirmed, "You have a beautiful smile, Deku." And this time her hand spoke instead of her words. She lightly touched the cheek that she had unintentionally slapped earlier on Deku. He was totally disarmed by that gentle, meaningful touch. Every heartbeat echoed in his ears as the warmth of her hand spread throughout his body, making him blush even more. Determination filled. Midoriya inhaled deeply as a wave of bravery passed over him. This was his chance, the moment he had dreamed of innumerable times but never imagined would arrive so abruptly. "Uraraka, will you be my girlfriend?" His face flushed completely as he asked. "I swear to always try my hardest for you." Uraraka was out of breath, feeling as though 1,000 arrows had been driven into her heart. Her lips opened slightly as she opened them to respond, but she quickly closed them again. She was overcome by the emotion's weight. As their gazes locked, she tightened her fist and squeezed Deku's hand. "What do you think? Could you hold off a bit until I respond?" Midoriya's expression was one of surprise. He didn't anticipate it. This was where, in his imagination, she would agree, and they would live happily ever after, just like in TV series. Instead, a sense of disappointment grew inside his chest. He tried to make sense of the situation and thought, perhaps she wants us to get to know each other a little better before becoming more than friends. "That makes sense," I said. "We could go to an amusement park this weekend if you want to spend more time with me, or perhaps we could grab some crepes after your martial arts class tomorrow." Nervously, he started to suggest, "I know a place that—" But before he could say anything more, Uraraka shook her head. That insignificant, uncomplicated action made him feel disappointed once more. Deku thought for a second that everything he was saying was incorrect. As though she didn't feel what she had just admitted, in spite of what she had said. Uraraka, however, cut the distance between them and, with a tenderness that took him entirely by surprise, kissed him on the left side, just on the corner of his lips, before he could overthink it any further. As though a current flowed through Midoriya's entire body, he shook. His confusion was exacerbated by that brief but intimate contact. For an instant, his mind was confused, and he wasn't sure whether he should be surprised, happy, or a combination of the two. Uraraka said, her voice now full of tenderness that, on the other hand, also seemed to carry a hint of sadness. "I don't want to stand in the way of your dream of becoming a hero, Deku. I kept my feelings from you earlier for that reason. And for that reason, I believe we should hold off on getting together for a while. Midoriya suddenly realized that there was more to the world than the two of them, as though a more expansive reality had struck him with full force. He recalled his objectives, his aspirations, the enormous task that was yet to come. His path as a hero could end before it even started if he failed the UA entrance exam, which was coming up. How could he have overlooked something so important? She's right, he thought, with a sense of urgency and resolve. It'll be difficult for us to see each other or go forward together if I don't get into UA. A fresh resolve took hold of him, bringing a firmness to his eyes that he had never displayed before. With unwavering conviction, he declared, I promise I'll train to the fullest. I'll give everything I have to get into UA, Uraraka. Uraraka glanced at him, and while her smile remained warm and reassuring, she couldn't conceal something in her eyes. Her pupils showed a faint, nearly undetectable hint of sadness. Since they were both pursuing their own goals, she was also aware of how challenging the road ahead would be and that reality hung heavy between them. I don't think I could imagine you any other way, Deku, she replied, her smile widening a little, but that small sadness still remained, buried beneath the surface. Deku smiled, but she couldn't get rid of the sense that something was still open. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't promise more than his heart and abilities could offer. He was actually experiencing so many different emotions at once that it was nearly overwhelming. The bright blue expanse stretched endlessly above Midoriya as he raised his eyes to the sky. He followed the path of a dandelion seed that was carried past his eyes by a light breeze, fascinated by the almost hypnotic movement of the tiny floating piece of life. He reached out and carefully caught it between his fingers without giving it much thought. He grinned at that brief encounter with nature, interpreted it as a sign, and started stretching before returning to his work. According to remarks made by former pupils of Professor Aizawa, if the data he discovered online was correct, some of the physical examinations that might be required prior to the test might be the dash of 50 meters. Carrying one sandbag at a time, Deku ran back and forth. Long jump. With buckets full of supplies, Deku leapt over the bridge's fractured opening. Tossing. His peculiar behavior, which occasionally appeared a little erratic as he attempted to manage too much at once, became apparent to the construction workers. One of the men yelled, "Hey, kid, take it easy," in a rough but worried voice. His co-worker next to him added, "Let him do what he wants," but his tone was more humorous. Well, but, he was elbowed by the man beside him, who whispered softly. Has the boss's daughter's gaze on him caught your attention? One day, I wouldn't be shocked if this young person became the company's owner. We'd better keep him on our side from the beginning. As soon as he nodded, the first employee's face changed to one of mild amusement. After noticing their looks, Midoriya returned their smiles with a bewildered expression. Sorry, did you say something? She asked. No, absolutely nothing. Go on, child. Put forth a lot of effort, they urged him, saying it almost simultaneously. Bakugo continued to stir the cement mixture he had been given while glaring at him from the side. Bakugo, wow. Uraraka said as she walked past, the mix appears flawless. Bakugo glanced at her, obviously irritated by the unexpected praise. What makes it so remarkable? He snarled. It isn't all that dissimilar from cooking. Anyone can do it. Surprised, Uraraka blinked. You cook? Suyu added. Never would have guessed, having come up without Bakugo noticing. One day, you should make something for us to try, Mina, who appeared to be listening to the conversation while working, added. Watching them with a mixture of surprise and interest was Midoriya, who had heard some of the conversation from a distance. Right, Kachan's been really popular with the girls lately. He unconsciously looked at Uraraka, who was laughing idly next to Bakugo, for a little longer than he should have. He felt something stirring inside of him, but he was unable to identify it. Return to work and stop wasting time, Bakugo yelled, obviously uneasy with the attention. The girls dispersed at his acerbic tone. Hurry up. Don't be so sullen. Uraraka smiled and lightly tapped his arm before leaving, but Bakugo did not respond. Bakugo kept stirring the mixture with his typical expression, but all of a sudden a childhood memory came flooding back. His father remarked, Katsuki, you can now add the noodles. Yay. He smiled slightly, a gesture so faint it was hardly perceptible, at the innocent thought of himself yelling with delight as he assisted in the kitchen. Seeing it, however, Deku, who had been observing him the entire time, felt a burden in his chest. What was the reason behind his smile? Would Kachan be able to smile like that without making fun of anyone? Bakugo turned his head at that moment and saw Midoriya looking at him, after a brief moment of eye contact. Bakugo frowned and grunted in irritation, obviously annoyed by the unwelcome attention. Deku felt uncomfortable and immediately went back to his exercises in an attempt to block out the confusion he was experiencing. Hey, don't you guys think we ought to assist in the reconciliation between Bakugo and Midoriya? Observing their most recent exchange, Hagakure inquired. They don't even talk to each other anymore after what happened. Ojiro nodded reflectively. It's a little depressing, isn't it? They attend the same school, have known one another since childhood, and both aspire to enroll at UA. Instead of avoiding conversation, they ought to be encouraging one another. Kirishima shrugged, having also observed the separation between the two. Yeah, I wouldn't try getting in between those two, she said. They should, in my opinion, handle it on their own, at their own pace. Uraraka, who had been paying close attention, nodded in agreement. Yeah, I believe that fight was somewhat like a conversation between them without words. Before the words can actually move forward, they must settle for a while. You guys know them better, Ojiro said, acknowledging their perspective. I suppose you're correct. After a brief period of silence, Mina, who is always full of energy, broke the silence. Speaking of getting to know one another better, she began with a cheeky grin. When Uraraka saw it coming, her mind started to raise alarms. Before the conversation could get awkward, Uraraka hurriedly said, "Oh, sorry, Mina, I think my dad's calling me." Mina continued to smile as she watched her go. So, she said, laughing, that's how she wants to play it. With a mixture of nervousness and interest, Kirishima gazed at her. Hey, what's up with you? You sound more like a villain now. Don't promise me you will. Oh, don't worry. Mina winked and said, it's just that some people need a little push in the right direction. Wiping the perspiration from his brow, Midoriya took a seat for a moment. His muscles were beginning to ache. For a moment, he let the cool breeze soothe him by closing his eyes. But before he could unwind completely, he saw that the sunlight above him was obscured by a shadow. When he opened his eyes, Uraraka was standing in front of him, smiling warmly and holding a water bottle. Well done today, Deku, she said, extending the bottle to him. Startled by the gesture, Midoriya blinked but couldn't help but smile in return as he accepted the bottle with gratitude. He replied, feeling relieved by her generosity, thanks, Uraraka. Any odd thoughts he might have had about Uraraka and Kacchan were erased in that instant, and he felt foolish for even thinking about them. Following their morning shift at the construction site, the group of volunteers was making their way to the train station. Some of them walked slowly, showing signs of exhaustion, but the lively conversation that broke out between them kept the mood light. As he adjusted his backpack on his shoulder, Kirishima, who was always the first to break the silence with an enthusiastic comment, spoke with excitement. Have any of you heard? Actors are being hired to take part in a section of the UA entrance exam, he started. Bakugo, who was a few paces behind the group, heard the conversation and scowled. He kept his distance, but he couldn't resist listening in. For what purpose would they be? Ojiro pondered as he walked beside him. Perhaps. For a rescue emergency situation? Midoriya's eyes brightened as he made a guess. Or perhaps to mimic a scene of a crime, or maybe. At that moment, he took out his notebook and began to mumble as he hurriedly scribbled notes, his ideas spilling onto the pages. His friends were used to seeing him lose himself in his own world whenever something about heroes or training excited him, so they were no longer surprised by his habit. Midoriya's distraction didn't stop Ojiro from speaking. As a teacher, I've heard that last year, the current principal dismissed a whole class because he didn't think they had potential. Last year, there was no Class 1B because of this. Uraraka appeared visibly surprised as he walked close to Tsuyu. That seems a bit extreme, she said, widened her eyes in surprise. In her typical neutral yet scathing tone, Tsuyu suggested, perhaps it's just a rumor the principal spread himself to build a reputation of being tough. Uraraka nodded repeatedly because he wanted to accept that explanation, but the others didn't seem to share his conviction. Something in the air caused them to become a little concerned. That kind of uncertainty only made the already challenging UA entrance exam more stressful. Ojiro crossed his arms. The previous system made it seem difficult enough to get into UA. We might not all be able to make it. The group fell silent as a result of his remark, and even Midoriya, who had briefly paused his writing, lowered his head. He was aware that many believed he faced the most difficult task ahead, even though no one expressed this directly. After all, it seemed impossible to pass a hero exam without a quirk. Ever the optimist, Kirishima attempted to lighten the tense situation with a smile. But it's definitely worth a shot. He cried out. You would be the first since All Might, Midoriya, if you could enter without a quirk. On the day of the test, a quirk that I had heard about in his generation materialized, and he was accepted. Midoriya smiled gently. I've also heard that. Without much enthusiasm, he answered, but honestly, I think it's just an urban legend. Mina, who is always direct and lighthearted, came over to Midoriya with a lot of energy and grabbed his arm before the conversation could go any further. Both Kirishima and Uraraka gave her a quick glance, but their responses to the gesture differed. Midoriya, it still amazes me that you don't have a quirk. You do a great job hiding it, Mina remarked, her eyes glimmering with interest. She leaned slightly closer to him as she spoke, which made Midoriya uneasy and uncertain of how to respond. The interrogation is about to begin, Kirishima thought, squinting. The sudden intimacy between Mina and Midoriya made Midoriya uneasy. Mina either didn't notice or maybe did, but didn't care that he could feel her chest against his arm. He tried to explain, hesitating. It's because of Hatsume, a bright girl. With her inventions, she has been assisting me. Midoriya quickly revealed his gloves. She wants to enroll in UA as well, but in the support course. To work on innovations, we get together once a week. Uraraka felt a little uneasy and clenched her fists gently in front of her chest when she heard that. She was troubled by the idea of Deku seeing Hatsume so frequently, but she wasn't sure why. Somehow, that bothers me. So clever, eh? Mina gave a cheeky smile. Do you also think she's cute? Midoriya stiffened, his face beginning to redden. In addition to the question itself, he was anxious because he knew Uraraka was listening, which caused him to feel a peculiar mixture of embarrassment and anxiety. Well, do you like her? Better yet, tell me. Mina leaned slightly closer and pressed. To Mina's surprise, Midoriya became thoughtful rather than blushing as she had anticipated. His gaze lingered on a far-off object before he spoke in a soothing voice. Hatsume is undoubtedly excellent. From the start, she embraced me for who I am, but she is just a friend to me. Additionally, I believe she views me as the ideal test subject for her creations. Hatsume worked on, listening through the transmitter built into Midoriya's gloves in a workshop crammed with devices and prototypes. Even after hearing her name mentioned, she didn't flinch, her focus was unwavering. In contrast, Uraraka experienced a sudden sense of relief. Hearing Deku's words made her smile a little, even though she wasn't sure why she had been so anxious. But Mina noticed right away. So, Midoriya, who do you like? She inquired with a playful smile. Well. Midoriya's expression grew even more tense. He didn't look at Uraraka because he knew that he would instantly reveal himself if he did. At least for the time being, he wasn't sure whether he should come clean about it or keep it a secret. Suyu intervened at the ideal time. She said, I don't think we should question him. The individual in question, Ribbit, should be the first to know who he likes. Always a romantic, Hagakure concurred. That's right, the sweetest thing is that. To everyone's surprise, Midoriya took a deep breath and smiled, albeit a little uneasy. It's no problem, he said in a composed yet determined tone. That individual is already aware. I'm just awaiting her response, but I swear I'll tell you everything if it goes well. Mina, taken aback by his straightforward reply, finally let him go. The others grinned in relief at Midoriya's sudden maturity. Congratulations, Midoriya. Kirishima applauded and yanked him into a headlock so tight that Midoriya almost stumbled. Real men do it that way. Mina looked at Kirishima playfully, not wanting to be left out. Perhaps you ought to take a lesson from him. What are you discussing? As the tension in the air subsided, Kirishima laughed. Bakugo complained, taking rapid steps in the direction of the station, which was now visible. What a load of crap. Knowing they would see each other again soon, the group bid each other farewell. While walking next to Ashido, Kirishima briefly turned back to watch Bakugo before turning to face Uraraka and Midoriya, who were both traveling to the same train station. Kirishima said, scratching his head, that makes sense. Bakugo dislikes these types of discussions. However, that response might also result from. Mina teased, pointing to Bakugo, Uraraka, and Midoriya with her fingers in an imaginary triangle. Hey, stop dreaming of strange things that will never happen, Kirishima suggested. That will not benefit you in any way. Believe me. Bakugo, Midoriya, and Uraraka were all in the same train car. With her head bobbing, Uraraka appeared to be fighting sleep while she sat. Bakugo faced the opposite door, either absorbed in the scenery or, depending on one's perspective, simply observing the reflection of the train's interior, while Midoriya stood in front of her. Uncomfortable, Midoriya asked himself. What made him feel so on edge around Kacchan? He took a half step to the left without really realizing it, just enough to block out Uraraka's reflection in the window from Kachan's position. Bakugo, meanwhile, was craving spaghetti and meatballs for supper, something he could prepare himself, as the train went by a cookware store. Perhaps he would surprise his mother before she returned from her job. He could already visualize it. The words, "This crap is better than mine," would come out of his mother's mouth. There was a brief smile on his face. Where in hell did that idea originate? He asked himself, perplexed and then annoyed. It was most likely the nonsense his mother was constantly putting on him. He could not allow it to go on. He would become as weak and pitiful as someone he knew too well if he let his guard down. Despite a chill running down his spine, Midoriya chose not to allow himself to be intimidated when he felt Kachan's eyes suddenly on him. Though still half asleep, Uraraka muttered, "Looks like the next stop is yours." Midoriya smiled kindly at her. Naturally, getting up early in the train's warmth occasionally made you want to fall asleep. "You are correct. Avoid dozing off, Uraraka," he said, his typical nervousness coming through. "Well, see you later." However, Midoriya leaned down, reached out, and gently took one of the long strands of her hair in an almost unthinking moment of impulse. Carefully, he lifted it to his lips and kissed it lightly. Uraraka's cheeks turned a deep red as the brief gesture was filled with tenderness. Incredulous at his audacity, Midoriya's own heart pounded, but there was no time to think about it. He started walking toward the door across from Bakugo on his own. He glanced inadvertently at his childhood friend, who was staring back at him with a mix of bewilderment and poorly disguised rage. When the train arrived at the station, the two boys left, going in different directions. However, at the school's entrance, their paths crossed once more. Just before Midoriya entered, Bakugo caught up to him and walked beside him for a brief moment, as though the silence between them was more profound than usual. "Hey, nerd." Midoriya looked at Bakugo in surprise when his voice sounded harsher than he had intended. Bakugo went on, "Without waiting, you should put her out of your mind if you want to have any chance of getting into UA. Women are trouble." Bakugo continued to walk without waiting for an answer, leaving Midoriya motionless as he took in the information. What had he said? It was nonsensical and didn't even sound like something Bakugo would typically say in such a casual manner. Bakugo continued to walk forward, wondering why in the world he had said that. Over the beach, the moon reflected off the soft waves. Midoriya kept doing pull-ups while juggling a soccer ball, his feet moving with strength and accuracy. While silently observing his apprentice, Toshinori reflected on how much had changed since their initial encounter. In front of him, the frightened, frail boy who had no quirk was now expertly managing a ball on a pitch-black beach, resolve blazing in his eyes. As he crossed his arms, Toshinori broke the silence and summarized, "So, you've decided to try getting into UA despite what All Might told you." Izuku took a deep breath and tapped the ball one more time before catching it in his hands. After a great deal of thought, he had decided that he couldn't give up, despite All Might's initial discouragement. "Though I believe I already anticipated this," Toshinori went on, "I didn't want to say anything until now, so you could make your own decision." "Really?" Midoriya, perspiring in the moonlight, gave him a startled look. The ball was in his arms, but his thoughts were elsewhere, digesting what his mentor had said. "As you may not have noticed, some of the exercises we've been doing are centered around important topics for the UA entrance exam." Toshinori threw a circular target into the air. Midoriya's response was almost automatic. The ball flew from his feet, struck the target's center, and then landed on the sand with a deft touch. Toshinori grinned. "We'll move on to smaller balls now." Midoriya kept his head down while Toshinori dug into a big bag. His face was cooled by the ocean breeze, but he was unable to shake a memory that was consuming his thoughts. With a slight turn toward the shore, he spoke without holding back. "You understand. I apologized to All Might on his website after learning what had happened to Kachan with the sludge monster, the one that escaped due to my actions. I apologized for causing that trouble and explained what had happened." However, he didn't answer. With the weight of that unanswered apology still crushing him, Izuku pressed his lips together. "I hope I haven't angered him." Toshinori hesitated, recalling that lengthy email he had read through to the end. He had tried not to smile when he heard one of the most heartbreaking and honest confessions he had ever heard, realizing how much Izuku cared for other people. "I seriously doubt that," he said coolly, without glancing at him. "I have a question for you before we go any further." Midoriya's body and voice both tensed. "Obviously, child. Ask away." With his back to the big sports bag, Toshinori kept searching for the balls but was unsuccessful. Midoriya stood with his hands balled into fists and his feet firmly planted in the sand. Izuku inhaled deeply as he felt the sand underfoot. He could hear the waves, but there was a storm raging inside. Do you think someone like me is real? Can you be a hero? With all the uncertainties and anxieties he had carried since he was a child, the shout nearly fell out of his throat. The ensuing quiet was disturbing. Undeterred, Toshinori continued to rummage through the bag. Well, when you consider it, that is the purpose of the entrance exam. Izuku froze in disbelief. Additionally, Mr. Yagi continued to talk while still searching for the balls, which was not the type of response he had anticipated. With years of teaching experience, Principal Aizawa is the most adept at identifying young people's untapped potential. Additionally, despite his strictness, his methods have worked. I have, however, never supported the swift disqualification of students. In my opinion, that only serves to motivate in the long run. When Toshinori eventually located the balls, he turned to see Midoriya's expression, which said it all. Do I come across as that when I give long, pointless explanations? Toshinori, a little frustrated with himself, combed his hair. I apologize, young Midoriya. I was unaware. After brushing the sand from his clothing, Toshinori got to his feet. You should be aware that I am also subject to error. He gave a little laugh. I guess it's because we've spent so much time together. With this, I've risen to the throne if you're the prince of nonsense and internal denial. Midoriya smiled timidly. Get moving, child. I'll give you the truthful response if you ask me again, as I should. Midoriya took a deep breath, mustering his courage again, his heart thumping, his feet steady in the sand. You think I'm capable of being a hero? He reiterated, his voice echoing powerfully across the deserted shore. Before responding, Toshinori waited for the sound to subside after hearing a big wave smash against a rock close to the shore. You are a hero. The statement struck Izuku with unexpected force because it was so straightforward and simple. The weight of those words caused his chest to tighten, his legs to tremble a little, and tears to well up in his eyes. It was then that he realized how much Toshinori's approval meant to him. Unbeknownst to him, that man had become as significant in his life as All Might. Izuku tried to control his emotions by putting a hand to his chest, but the tears started to fall. Toshinori smiled as he walked up to Midoriya, saying, We still need to work on the crying, but I think you'll be a great hero one day. I'm persuaded by you. Through his tears, Midoriya grinned, feeling that the agonizing memory of All Might had finally, if only briefly, vanished. Thank you, sir. His voice broke with emotion as he whispered. And on a deserted beach in the moonlight, Izuku discovered the last motivation he didn't realize he needed to take the test. The room echoed softly with the sound of the drums. With his eyes closed and his hands precisely striking the drumsticks against the drums, Bakugo remained engrossed in the rhythm. It seemed as though the music was emanating from the very center of his being because of the intense focus in the air. After that, the performance ended in perfect time. Everyone stopped in unison, and a sigh of satisfaction filled the room. Wiping the perspiration from her brow, Jiro grinned with a mixture of admiration and laughter. She put her electric guitar down and turned to face her fellow musicians. While Kirishima, with his typical lively vigor, stood by the microphone, still catching his breath, Shoji continued to hold the bass, his several arms casually resting over the instrument. You really impressed me with that last song, Jiro said, breaking the silence as she gave Bakugo a grateful look. I thought we were destined to play heavy rock all the time when I first met you. Like a thought bubble visible to all, a picture of Bakugo appeared in her head. Bakugo wearing a vest, playing the drums with a headband, and striking them so violently that it appeared as though he was going to destroy them. Kirishima laughed out loud at the image in her head. He enthusiastically added, I understand exactly what you mean. When I first met him, I felt the same way. In Bakugo's mind bubble, Kirishima exclaimed. Perish. Bakugo replied, getting to his feet, You two should stop staring at me so much and focus on playing. There was a tinge of pride in his words, despite his dry tone. Remember what you said when I joined this band, too. Jiro, who was obviously accustomed to his demeanor, rolled her eyes. Yes, I do remember. She responded with a frustrated tone, waving her hand as if to ward off a fly. I won't fall in love with you, blah, blah, blah. Without replying, Bakugo merely waved a hand in a nonchalant farewell without turning around and walked out of the room in his typical easygoing manner. As Kirishima watched his friend go, he sighed. He crossed his arms and said, sympathetically, Don't take it personally, Jiro. Unbelievably, He has received confessions from numerous girls recently, and he is simply tired of the whole thing. As he adjusted the bass strings, Shoji, who had remained silent for the majority of the conversation, gave a small nod. With his usual calm, he remarked, "No wonder his ego is through the roof." Kirishima grinned and shook his head. In defense of his friend, he retorted, "Quite the opposite. I believe that when it comes to girls, he still doesn't know how to handle it, unlike when he's commended for his peculiarity. He feels uneasy about it." Skeptical, Jiro arched an eyebrow. Uncomfortable, Bakugo. He was just a jerk with a superiority complex, in my opinion. Kirishima chuckled. Couldn't be further from the truth, Kirishima went on, continuing to defend him. Bakugo hasn't even considered taking advantage of any of the girls around him, in my opinion, because he is truly solely focused on becoming the best hero. In fact, he's quite good in that regard. Midoriya rolled around in his bed, caught up in a dream that drew him into a vivid, perplexing world. He had returned to the public baths, where he had discovered Uraraka following the assault by Himiko Toga. The hazy walls, the faint sound of the pool, the desperate sensation of giving her mouth to mouth, all of it was so vivid. He believed he was going to lose her at that very moment. Although terror had taken over his entire being, it was also a turning point in his life, a moment when he started to realize something he had not given much thought to. He had not acknowledged the depth of his feelings for her. They were intense, too. The scene in the dream had changed slightly now. He saw the same moment, but this time, instead of the frantic relief of saving Uraraka, his lips parted from hers. It was more akin to the conclusion of a kiss, one that had a warmth he was unfamiliar with. Uraraka opened her eyes, and they both grinned as though it were a routine they had developed together rather than an unusual moment. Everything seemed so effortless and natural. Uraraka put her hands on his cheeks and then put her arms around his neck, suggesting, "We should continue." Midoriya experienced a surge of anxiety that was accompanied by an irresistible pull. But he felt resistance from within, as though his body was alerting him to the impending danger. His stomach churned with a mixture of panic and desire at the thought of approaching her and feeling the warmth of her nude body against his. Uraraka, however, did not appear to have the same hesitancy. She pressed her fingers softly into Midoriya's neck, encouraging him to go on. Uraraka. He lowered himself slowly to kiss her once more, whispering, his voice shaking. Their bodies colliding was a clash of novel feelings. The sensation of her breasts lightly pressing against his chest was so delightful and thrilling that it overcame him. As his heart raced, Midoriya's hands moved through her hair, caressing her silky locks as their kisses became more passionate. He tried to tell himself, "Stop. This isn't right," as he struggled with the guilt that was invading him and the pleasure of the moment. Then he was called by Uraraka. Although her voice was gentle, it was powerful enough to take his breath away. The surrounding water started to boil, filling the room with steam and shrouding them in a fog so dense that he could hardly see her face. Uraraka called him again, almost moaning, "Deku." "Ah!" he exclaimed, startled awake. Except for the moonlight coming in through the window, his room was pitch black. His skin was burning even though the air around him was cold. His body shook and his heart pounded as he put both hands over his face. Never in his life had he been so agitated. "I apologize, I apologize, I apologize," he muttered uncontrollably as he awkwardly got out of bed. He opened the window and pulled the curtain, allowing the cool, humid night air to enter the room. In the hopes that the breeze would soothe his body and mind, he closed his eyes. He tried to force the vision of Uraraka from his mind as he stood there inhaling deeply. The dream still weighed heavily on him, as though every detail had been permanently engraved on his skin. At last, he muttered, "I apologize. Uraraka. I didn't intend to." Suddenly, Kachan's words replayed in his brain. "If you want any chance of getting into UA, you should forget about her. Women only cause trouble." Izuku thought about that. In his own way. Had Kachan been considerate in giving him that advice? Should he distance himself from Uraraka? At least until he got into UA? But he was more troubled than he had anticipated by the idea of avoiding her. He let out a sigh and left the window open to let the night air continue to enter. His face was softly brushed by the cool air, but it was insufficient to calm his restlessness. Moving to his desk, he turned on the lamp in a robotic motion. The room was filled with warm light, which created gentle shadows on the walls. His thoughts were disorganized as he sat down slowly and rested his head in his hands while gazing up at the ceiling. The digital clock to his right was glowing a relentless 4 a.m. It's too early to wake up and too late to sleep again. It was the first time he had ever had a dream like that. He was aware of what it meant, but he didn't want to start thinking about those things exclusively. Considering his first experience with Hatsume and how Ashido had teasingly clung to his arm, he concluded that girls were unquestionably dangerous. Shaking his head, he attempted to remove those pictures as well. He certainly didn't want to disappoint the people who were now supporting his desire to become a hero. Uraraka's face was the first that sprang to mind. He distinctly recalled what she had said, delivered with such conviction. "I don't want to interfere with your heroic aspirations." Then his thoughts turned to his mother and her loving yet concerned face. "You are aware that I will constantly worry and be afraid for you, but I promise to support you in whatever you decide to do." His mind was filled with the reverberation of Mr. Yagi's words. "You are a hero." Furthermore, he was unable to forget the pledge he had given Todoroki. He hadn't been able to hold it up so far, so every time he thought about it, a twinge of pain shot through his chest. Then, after hearing about the kidnapping of Todoroki's mother, he had said, "I'll help you," by the beach. Furthermore, to believe that Todoroki had informed him. "You seem to be the first person I ever had as a friend. I have faith that everything will work out." He felt very guilty now. He was the subject of numerous promises and expectations. He glanced around his room as he whirled in his chair. It felt more empty than usual. All Might posters had once covered the wall in front of him, but now it appeared empty and lifeless. With a sudden idea, he slowly got up and walked toward his desk. Perhaps he could regain some control if he put his thoughts in order and put them into words. He stood in front of the blank wall and took a small notepad from the edge of the table. He tore off a page and adhered it in the middle. He wrote a single word in neat handwriting, "Dabi." In his mind, the name reverberated with a mix of doubt and resolve. He picked up one of his notebooks and went back to his desk to begin going through his notes. He might be able to find a way to keep all of his promises if he concentrated on the specifics, what he already knew and what he needed to do. Toshinori was standing in front of his study window, staring absently at the blue sky above the city. The city's bustle seemed far away in the distance, as though this time of introspection had cut him off from the din of daily life. A nest high in the tree held two birds, apparently oblivious to the worries of the world, while the branches of the tree just outside swayed gently. His thoughts were interrupted by a gentle knock on the door, and he turned to see Tsukauchi, the chief of police and an old friend, enter with a kind grin. With a tone of appreciation, Toshinori said, "Thanks for coming, Tsukauchi." Tsukauchi responded, "I was in the area and saw your message," as he walked toward the center of the room and quietly clicked the door shut behind him. Toshinori took an envelope from his desk and gave it to his friend, his expression more solemn than usual and his manner more serious. "I want to entrust you with something very important to me, which is why I asked you here," he said, his voice softer than usual. "If something were to happen to me, I would like you to give this to young Midoriya." Tsukauchi carefully accepted the envelope and raised an eyebrow in surprise when he saw that it was not sealed. "May I seal it for you?" he asked, seeking his friend's gaze. No. Toshinori crossed his arms and said, "I purposely left it open so you could read it too. I'm not hiding anything from you. I have total faith in you." "May I?" Tsukauchi inquired, and after observing his friend's nod, he sat down on the sofa. Recalling the words he had written in the letter, Toshinori looked back out the window, at the nest in the tree, where a bird and its chick sat. "I've been keeping a careful eye on you over the past few months, and as I mentioned to you that day on the beach, you have greatly surpassed my expectations, young Midoriya. Initially, I just wanted to assist you in determining your own course based on your skills. I couldn't help but think that this is exactly what the world needs right now, though, after getting to know your quick-witted, determined mind and kind heart. The threat of all for one persisted even after I rose to hero status, and I was unaware that my path gradually became tarnished with blood. I don't want you to go down that route, young Midoriya. I think that if you develop one for all, this power has the potential to grow into something extraordinary, something that goes beyond the death and violence I've left behind. Not because I don't trust you, but because I don't want you to feel the weight of being my heir and attract too much attention while you're still learning to control my power. I have chosen not to tell you all of this just yet. I swear to do everything in my power to keep Shigaraki from becoming a burden for you. He is still out there. In my opinion, it is my duty to deal with him because he is both my master's grandson and the heir to my hardest enemy. Just concentrate on being a typical student in the hero course for the time being. I think I still have the strength to prevent you from taking on needless challenges that would strain you beyond your breaking point and worry people around you. When you emerge as the new peace symbol of the future, it will be your moment to shine. I sincerely hope that you never receive this letter because of any unfortunate events, but if you do, remember that a piece of me will always be with you and take care of yourself. All power." Tsukauchi finished the letter, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his coat's inner pocket. He got off the couch and turned to face his friend, who was still standing by the window. Amazingly moving, All Might. I swear, I'll protect it, he said gravely. Toshinori smiled slightly, but his face was still marked by the sadness that had engulfed him. Without taking his eyes off the nest, he said, I'd also like to ask you another favor. Please assist young Midoriya with an exam so she can join the police force. Tsukauchi scowled, clearly perplexed. However, does that not go against what you just stated in the letter? Still confused, he asked. I did promise him, though. I want to show him that he has a lot of options to realize his dreams, even though I have a feeling he has already decided to enroll at UA. He paused, lowering his gaze a little. I understand that when I told young Midoriya that he couldn't be a hero without a quirk and that he believed he had already selected a successor, he suffered greatly. However, this is because he has only been focusing on my accomplishments and hasn't given my numerous failures enough consideration. He is still too young, in my opinion, to comprehend a number of life lessons, such as the fact that you shouldn't become depressed simply because things don't go as planned. With a clearer understanding of Toshinori's intentions, Tsukauchi nodded silently. The man who had always been a representation of courage and hope was now showing a different side, one that was more human and conscious of how his actions might affect other people. He approached the window and stood next to Toshinori, who was observing the tree branches as they swayed gently in the wind. I thought Midoriya was a good kid when I first met him on the day Shigaraki showed up at the mall. Tsukauchi said with a slight smile, but I have to admit, it seemed like he was in the middle of a date when everything happened. Is he focused enough to be a great hero, in your opinion? Toshinori chuckled, as though the remark had temporarily lifted the spirits. I think you can expect from him what you would from any child his age, he said, his smile more sincere. However, I don't think that's a bad thing. Conversely, I believe it could even serve as motivation for him to put in his best effort, to persevere. You are correct. Tsukauchi pondered, just because we both turned into workaholics doesn't mean all heroes have to give up having a partner or a family. All I can hope is that young Midoriya will be able to find the equilibrium he needs in his life. Himiko Toga was sitting on the edge of a flimsy bed, fumbling with her socks, when the door exploded open, disturbing her tranquility. Oh! They both let out a simultaneous, equally startled scream. The door slammed shut instantly, only to reopen a few seconds later, revealing Shigaraki looking somewhat perplexed. Who are you? She rose and bowed as though she were a member of the royal family. Hey, she said, my name is Himiko Toga, with a tone that was both sweet and sinister. Shigaraki squinted at her, obviously wary of her demeanor. And why are you in this place? He went on. You are aware that trespassing on private property is prohibited. Well, I was running down the street in my undies. Unclothed. Ignoring his response, she went on, long story. In any case, I chose to seek refuge in an alley after spotting a magical portal there. And since it closed directly behind me, I believe it was the right decision. After that, I dozed off for a few days. Kurogiri. Shigaraki shouted, keeping his gaze fixed on her. Behind him, Kurogiri materialized as a quiet shadow, his serene manner standing in stark contrast to the mounting tension in the space. Kurogiri said calmly as usual, Tamura Shigaraki, you'll need all the help you can get to carry out your plan. She has what it takes to be useful to you, and like others, I've been watching her for a while. Shigaraki scowled. A schoolgirl, though? Shigaraki asked him a question. Have you been observing me? You are perverts? She drew a knife from her clothing and accused him. Regarding your plans, I don't want to be instructed on how to behave or what to do. Toga suddenly sprang at Shigaraki, advancing at a predator's pace. But as her knife blade was about to brush against his neck, a portal materialized out of nowhere, causing her to twist and aim the knife at her own throat. She dropped the weapon due to the shock. Unfazed, Shigaraki knelt down to retrieve the knife. It broke apart in a matter of seconds when his fingers touched it. She frowned and glared at Shigaraki and Kurogiri, saying, Hey, 2 against 1 isn't fair. That's life, young one. Life isn't fair, Shigaraki said icily. Changing the order of things is what we are attempting to demonstrate here. He moved out of the way, making room for the doorway. You can go if you want society and heroes to tell you what to do and everything to remain the same. For you, Kurogiri will open a new portal. Yes, said the other, instantly complying. But Toga remained motionless. She fixed Shigaraki with her gaze, and a dark, twisted connection seemed to form between them that bound them in an unspoken understanding. Once more, the portal closed. May I bring someone else if I plan to stay for a while? with the same phony innocence she had displayed from the beginning, she asked. Another student? Shigaraki inquired, lacking enthusiasm. No, but close, Toga smiled in response. Always one step ahead, Kurogiri spoke before Shigaraki could finish. He glanced toward the hallway and said, I think the person you're talking about is already here. Twice showed up a moment later with a tray. Waffles, anyone? He said with a smile. Although I believe there aren't enough for everyone, I made them with a lot of love. Shigaraki let out a tired sigh. Taking a deep breath, Midoriya held the gun tightly while maintaining a determined and focused gaze. Aligning the sights with the target in front of him, he closed one eye. One deliberate and accurate shot after another reverberated throughout the training field. After completing the round, he let go of the breath he had been holding and lowered the weapon. There was no time to rest, but his eyes gleamed with a mixture of determination and satisfaction. He was waiting for the next test. He could see the obstacle course in front of him. There was an imposing wall that he would have to climb, a net that would make him crawl on the ground, and a rope that hung, swaying slightly in the wind. Midoriya immediately sprang for the rope, gaining speed and skillfully swinging himself across. His body slipped through the gaps as his hands and legs coordinated, slowing him down but not stopping him. At last he came to the wall. Grasping the jutting stones with his hands, he climbed slowly, gasping as he did so. He was already descending on the other side a second later, his skill and speed demonstrating the rigorous training he had received. As Izuku sprinted past him, Tsukauchi, holding a stopwatch, halted the timer. His smile was a testament to the young man's dedication to each test. When he showed him the recorded time, Tsukauchi remarked admiringly, "Looks like Toshinori has been pushing you to your limits." Still gasping for air, Izuku couldn't resist grinning back and slowly standing up. "If you ever wanted to, you could easily pursue a career in law enforcement." Izuku responded, now standing erect and wearing a serious expression. "Thank you, sir. Having options is a good thing. Regarding what you said earlier, have you considered applying to another hero academy?" Tsukauchi went on. "That's just in case. The trials this year appear to be the most difficult that UA has encountered in a long time." He said calmly, recalling the moments that had shaped his decision, "I've been thinking about it for a while. Although I have a number of reasons for wanting to join, the truth is that I don't need to be UA to become a hero." Memories paraded in his mind, one after the other. In sharp contrast to his current circumstances at school, he reflected on the construction volunteers and how he felt that each of them had become his friend. His mind inevitably turned to Kacchan and Todoroki, two individuals who were so dissimilar from one another but whom he envisioned sharing a common journey to become heroes at UA. He lingered a little longer, though, because of the thought of Uraraka. His mind was filled with the fleeting yet intense memory of Uraraka kissing him on the corner of his lips. He tried to be serious, but his heart pounded a little quicker and his cheeks flushed a little. The sound of a whistle reverberated throughout the field, and he swiftly shook the thought away. Busy with their own training, the police academy students were rushing back and forth. And then he had a thought that had never occurred to him before. Midoriya's expression was determined but thoughtful as she gazed at Tsukauchi. "Excuse me, sir," he started hesitantly. "Do you think I could ask you for a favor, if it's not too much trouble?" Tsukauchi watched him curiously, trying to figure out what he was thinking as he looked toward the training students. "Yes. Tell me, Midoriya," he said, letting his shoulders drop. "What are you thinking about?" As he moved through the city streets in his police academy uniform, Midoriya experienced a mixture of nerves and excitement. He felt weird wearing the uniform, like he was on a covert operation. He had one of his notebooks in his backpack, which was full of observations and notes, along with a hand-drawn sketch of Dabi. He thought about the recent video chat he had with Todoroki right before leaving as he was walking. "He is." Todoroki cried out in shock when he saw the drawing that Midoriya had created. "Midoriya, you truly have a gift for drawing." Izuku grinned, a little bashful at the praise. "They used to make fun of my drawings, so I decided to practice, and it wasn't that hard," he said, smiling, but he almost instantly took on Todoroki's serious expression. "I believe Dabi was exaggerating when he claimed to have a collaborator with a quirk that could broadcast to any location in the world. I came across a reference to a hero with a comparable ability in my notebooks. They claimed in an interview that those who have peculiar ways of sending pictures or videos have never had a range of more than 2 kilometers. This implies that Dabi was most likely close to your home, Todoroki, when he made that broadcast." Todoroki nodded, his expression blank but his thoughts obviously active. "All right," he said, already formulating a plan in his mind, "then we'll split up to cover more ground." Midoriya added, displaying the alternate drawing, I also drew a sketch of what Dobby might look like if he tried to hide his identity, with glasses and a mask. Todoroki looked at it carefully. All right, if the vendors have seen anyone who fits that description, someone who appears to be concealing their face or scars, we'll ask them. It's better than doing nothing, even if the chances are slim. With a determined nod, Izuku said. Even when the paths appeared challenging or unclear, there was always a way to proceed. He now remembered every detail of that conversation as he strolled through the streets holding his notebook and the Dobby sketch. Every hint, no matter how tiny, was vital to their search for him. His focus was abruptly disrupted by a tall, black-haired woman wearing a pink dress bumping into him. She appeared preoccupied as she walked backwards without looking. He staggered under the impact, and his notebook dropped to the floor, spilling some of its pages and Dobby's sketch. The woman instantly apologized and stooped to assist him in gathering his belongings. She picked up the sketch with curiosity after her hands found it first. This individual, she whispered, her brow furrowed slightly as she studied the drawn face. Excitement made Izuku's heart skip a beat. It might be a lead. He said, "Excuse me," with a tone that was both urgent and hopeful. "Did you see him?" The woman shook her head after giving him one more look with a contemplative expression. "No," she answered with a hint of melancholy. "I just assumed something horrible must have happened to him to end up looking like this." Astonished by the remark, Midoriya hesitated for a moment. He couldn't help but agree in part when he saw Dobby's face without any background information. There was a tragic quality to Dobby's appearance that suggested intense pain or suffering, despite everything he had done. "Is he not there?" Curious, the woman asked. "He's actually being pursued. I would appreciate it if you could report him to the police right away if you see him," Midoriya firmly responded, picking up the sketch and putting it back in his notebook. Before heading off, he nodded briefly in farewell. For her part, the woman watched him fade into the crowd, a hint of slyness concealed behind her glasses. Although no one could have seen it, a small smile appeared on her lips. "So you've decided," Toshinori, Gran Torino's gruff but inquisitive voice reverberated through the earpiece. All Might said, settling into his chair with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. "That's right, Master. What are your thoughts on it?" A soft sigh was heard after a moment of silence on the line. "Although I'm shocked, I can't say that I don't like the child at all." Toshinori grinned and laughed heartily. "I assume that indicates you have a strong affection for him." Gran Torino replied firmly, "At least the kid thinks a lot before acting. In contrast to a certain impetuous young man I knew years ago. Master, I'm working on getting better. This choice, I believe, is my biggest test of that." Gran Torino hesitated, then went on. "However, there's something that interests me," Gran Torino noted. "According to what I understood from Nanashimura, you cannot give someone your power unless they understand what it is, accept it, and concur with the current bearer. That's what keeps one for all from happening to anyone who comes into contact with your DNA." As he carefully examined the food he was cooking, Toshinori acknowledged, "Yeah, I've thought a lot about it. However, I believe I've discovered a kind of legal gap." Gran Torino fell silent as they eagerly awaited his next move. While All Might went on, a schoolgirl attempting to make her favorite boy accept her Valentine's chocolates without him wanting to take them is a glaring illustration of how it wouldn't work. More like a girl who is already seeing a boy is what I'm attempting to do. Without saying anything, she places the chocolates in his locker, and when he discovers them, though he is unsure of who left them, he chooses to eat them because he believes they were from her. That ought to be sufficient to finish the one-for-all transfer. You, Toshinori, and your bizarre examples. You're not going to change, are you? In response, Gran Torino said, "Okay, though. I guess you know that power better than anyone if you've had it for years." With a new seriousness in his voice, All Might said, "That's right, Master. All I can hope for is that he will still think of me when he uses the power for the first time because he still respects me as All Might." "And when are you going to accomplish that?" Toshinori was making sandwiches when he noticed one of his blonde hairs and put it in the center of the sandwich after saying, "I'll see him later and try to give him some of my DNA discreetly. Even telling him the truth, let alone asking him to eat my hair, is unthinkable." "Knowing you, Toshinori, I can definitely imagine you saying that," Gran Torino replied, without a trace of doubt. "Master, I'm not sure what weird idea you have of me," Toshinori reprimanded, a little disheartened. For 2 hours, Midoriya had been pacing the neighborhood, asking people if they had seen Dobby, but he had been unsuccessful. He made the decision to stop and rest in the closest park, leaning toward a water fountain to sip water, as he was exhausted and experiencing dry mouth. The cool liquid relieved his thirst, but his mind remained restless, always alert. searching for answers around every corner. He heard the voices of children nearby as he got to his feet. "What's the matter? You want to play heroes, but why not?" a boy inquired. With curiosity, Midoriya turned toward the sound. Another boy was surrounded by 3 children, one of whom had small horns on a red cap. He was being pressured by the 3 to play their game. "You'd make the ideal villain with that cap. Hurry up," as one of the children pulled on the boy's arm. "I stated that I had no desire to," the tense voice of the boy in the cap protested. The 3 children and the boy in the cap then got into a fight. The park's adults paid little attention, and the atmosphere didn't seem especially violent. Most likely, they assumed it was just children acting like children. On the other hand, Midoriya found that small scene unsettling. Uninvited memories of his early years came flooding back, reminding him of the times when he had been forced into similar circumstances. He couldn't watch helplessly. Without hesitation, one of the 3 children grabbed a stone from the floor and hurled it at the boy wearing the cap. Instinctively, Midoriya ran in their direction. His arm was slightly scraped by the stone, but he was able to move out of the way before the boy was struck. "I believe that's sufficient, children. Play well." Astonished, the 2 girls who were with the violent boy turned to face Midoriya, and one of them muttered, "Leave this place now." After giving Midoriya one more glare, the person who had thrown the stone pointed at him. "If you are only a police academy student, you cannot act like a hero." Yeah. Midoriya was shocked to learn that a 4-year-old was bullying him once more after all these years. "And for not enjoying heroes, you are a strange person, Kota," he yelled before taking off. Before Midoriya could comprehend what was happening, he saw the boy in the cap, who was the focus of all the chaos, glaring at him angrily. In an attempt to avoid making the same error, Midoriya tried to remember what he had recently learned from Kachan. "I apologize. I had no intention of interfering. Not that I ever believed you were weak, but even for a strong person, 3 against 1 didn't seem fair." The boy's brows were furrowed as he continued to glare at him. "It's not that you dislike heroes, either. They were trying to make you the villain, so you probably didn't want to play with them." The boy covered his face with his cap after that. I despise villains and heroes alike." The boy used all the force his little fists could muster to punch Midoriya in the groin before he could react. Midoriya's face went pale instantly as the pain shot through his body, forcing him to kneel. "I also detest busybodies who harm themselves in the name of protecting others." He was left on the ground, bewildered and in excruciating pain, after the boy reprimanded him and stepped on his hand before fleeing. Amid the agony, Midoriya pondered how he had made a mistake once more. He pondered, unable to resist wondering whether he had misunderstood the circumstances entirely. Even worse, he had to answer his phone when it started to vibrate because it might be someone who knew something about Dabi. "Hello," he uttered, his voice quivering. "Midoriya." Todoroki's distinct voice on the other end sounded grave. "Arrive as soon as possible. Someone who appears to know something about Dabi showed up at the police station," she said, taking off her sunglasses and rearranging her hair as though that alone would reveal who she really was. "My real name is Momo Yaoyorozu." In practice, however, the difference was minimal. "Ah." Midoriya realized right away, almost yelling in shock, "that you were in disguise. However, why?" "All right." However, Todoroki cut her off before she could reply, his voice clearly urgent. His icy eyes conveyed the gravity of the situation as he said, "I think that can wait. I need you to let me know right away if you have any information about the person in the drawing. This is crucial to my ability to locate my mother." When Yaoyorozu heard that, he became more serious. "I am not merely aware of something. I can take you to see him," she nearly brags. "I found the person you're looking for with a little bit of luck and some assumptions that would be too difficult to explain at this time. I discreetly placed a tracking chip on his clothing and feigned tripping over him." "Are trackers with you at all times?" she was asked by Chief Tsukauchi. With confidence, Yaoyorozu explained, "My quirk allows me to create things as needed, as long as I know their physical properties and how they work." "Are you able to develop the tracker locator at this moment?" Todoroki inquired. "Obviously," she assured them, starting to focus. "I can give it to you if you all look away for a moment." Todoroki didn't understand, but Midoriya and Chief Tsukauchi looked away instantly. "Why?" Todoroki looked away only after Yaoyorozu briefly exposed the area of her dress around her chest. When she was done, she stretched the locator to Todoroki, who hesitated for a second to accept it, and said, "Here it is." Her cheeks were a little flushed. She insisted, and Todoroki took it, saying, "This will help if it's true that you needed to locate your mother." Chief Tsukauchi acted quickly, grabbing his phone and phoning his team as he made his way to the exit. I don't think your father would ever forgive us for leaving him out of this, even though he is on a mission. He said gravely as he left, I'm going to try to find him and see if he's finished. Todoroki got to his feet and nodded resolutely. He said, I'll go too, after the police chief. After giving him a brief glance, Tsukauchi decided not to try to talk him out of it since he knew that Todoroki would not part with the locator for anything. Yes. Then accompany me. They both hurried off, but Todoroki stopped as they were ready to go through the door. He glanced back at Yaoyorozu and Midoriya, who were observing him from across the room. He said, thank you both, with a genuineness that reverberated throughout the tiny room. Yaoyorozu and Midoriya both returned his smile, a gesture of friendliness that momentarily eased the tension. With a mixture of frustration and resolve, Shigaraki watched the members around him with restless fingers. All right. Is the plan now clear to everyone? His patience was clearly wearing thin when he asked, because I won't repeat it again. Standing in a shadowy corner, Dabi crossed his arms and had a serious yet casual expression on his face. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be busy that day. With words brimming with contempt, he challenged, I don't like being included in your plans. Shigaraki's face darkened as he scowled. Remember that Kurogiri provided you with the assistance you requested. In a threatening tone, he responded, so anything you have to do can wait, making it apparent that he would not tolerate any rejections. Twice, who was seated in the front row, was observing the tension in the air when he noticed something. He stared at Dabi's shirt. With his usual light tone and a hint of seriousness, he said, hey, let me save this little bug that has nothing to do with this before the destruction and fire break loose. When Shigaraki and Dabi looked in the direction Twice was pointing, they noticed something strange. A small electronic device appeared on Dabi's shirt. Dabi scowled, but Shigaraki had already reached out before he could respond. He shattered the gadget in his hand with a swift motion, clearly frustrated. A monitoring tool, he concluded, gritting his teeth in anger. You allowed them to use a tracking chip to tag you? I don't think you're very smart, said Twice. Dabi thought back to the time he had discovered a flamboyant girl with pink hair in the street. Yes. With a note of self-criticism in his voice, Dabi acknowledged, perhaps I'm not very smart. But Twice he jumped right in with his naive optimism. Avoid saying that. Consider it simply that they are too intelligent. Yes, that sounds more pleasant. He attempted to lift his spirits, as though maintaining optimism was essential to the group's morale. Shigaraki stepped forward in rage, his fingers poised to destroy something more than a tracker. Although it was obvious that he intended to attack Dabi, Kurogiri intervened between them with a composed and strategic demeanor. Kurogiri interrupted, his voice firm but low, no, Tamura Shigaraki. This could work in our favor. We can trick them into falling into a trap if they know where we are. However, that will require Twice's abilities, and we must depart right away. Twice he raised an eyebrow, perplexed, but always in his own world. Me? As though uncertain if he had heard correctly, he asked, gesturing dramatically to himself. During the video call with Midoriya, Todoroki remained serious as usual. So, Dabi got away. As Izuku sat down at his desk, he couldn't help but feel a little depressed by the news. Yeah, Todoroki answered, maintaining eye contact. The operation was swift but covert. My dad. Before continuing, he paused for a moment and knocked on the door while feigning to deliver a pizza. In shock, Midoriya blinked. I don't think Endeavor would say that. They coerced him, Todoroki clarified, his tone devoid of any emotion. He then created a large opening in the doorway to catch them off guard, but none of the criminals were inside when we entered. With his chin resting on his hand, Midoriya scowled. Perhaps they saw the tracker. The police chief also believes that. Todoroki gave a small nod. There were indications that they hurried out of the area. Luckily, we located my mother in a locked room. She refused to let a doctor examine her because she was so shaken up, but she did let me help her leave. Although the worry still weighed heavily on his chest, Midoriya lowered his head slightly in relief, thinking, at least she's safe now. To find Dabi, I suppose we'll need to continue our investigation. With a firm gaze, Todoroki shook his head. At the moment, that is not the top priority. My mom is sleeping at home because of you. Todoroki smiled slightly, then sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. Given that they still have unresolved issues, the doctor suggested that my father limit his contact with her for a while. I will therefore take turns looking after her and keeping her company with my siblings. Todoroki closed his eyes for a moment, his voice softening when he reopened them. To be honest, Midoriya, I am so grateful that you made this possible. You've shown yourself to be a reliable friend. The words from Todoroki caused Midoriya's cheeks to warm up a little. He smiled nervously and scratched the back of his neck. All I wanted was for this time to go smoothly. They did. Todoroki nodded slightly, but his face darkened once more. I have a final favor to ask of you. Midoriya sat up straight, waiting for the order. For the time being, Midoriya, I want you to stop concentrating on catching Dabi, Todoroki stated gravely. I'm aware that you've been studying tirelessly for the UA entrance exam and that you likely worked very hard on this search for my mother, but your eyes make it obvious that you haven't been getting enough sleep lately. Startled, Midoriya moved in his chair. That week, it wasn't the first person to notice. The day before, Uraraka had attempted to touch his cheek, and he recalled how he had reflexively leapt back, clumsily dodging her hand. He attempted to reassure Todoroki with a smile that fell short of his eyes, saying, "Don't worry, I'm fine. All I've been experiencing is odd dreams, and occasionally it's been difficult to fall back asleep." Another dream about that Kachan guy? Todoroki's eyebrow went up. Midoriya chuckled uneasily. No, not precisely. Todoroki silently watched him, as though examining each and every facial expression. Afterward, he lifted a hand and expelled a tiny stream of icy air that encircled his fingers. I can if it's bothering you. I assure you that's not the case. To prevent Todoroki from seriously considering intervening, Midoriya waved his hands. It's something distinct. Todoroki's eyes narrowed as he thought deeply. Can't you tell me something? A knot formed in Midoriya's stomach, not because he was reluctant to tell him, he simply had no idea how. Is it related to your friend? Todoroki asked abruptly. What was her name? Uraraka. Midoriya stiffened. Uncomfortable, he jumped out of his chair. Well, notice the time. He tried to end the conversation by laughing awkwardly. I think you're right, I should get some rest. As though he had noticed more than Midoriya was prepared to acknowledge, Todoroki observed him calmly. Okay. One day, if you can, come train at my house. It's a large area. To avoid upsetting my mother, we can practice fights in a wing separate from her lodging. If you want, you are welcome to stay over. With a more sincere smile, Midoriya nodded, feeling more comfortable now that the topic had changed. Thanks, I'll do that. However, Todoroki continued to observe him for a moment longer, as though he was still not completely sure that everything was all right. He said nothing else, though. The video call came to an end with a final goodbye. Midoriya let out a sigh and leaned back in his chair, and his thoughts drifted back to the dreams that had been bothering him, the ones in which the feelings and unsolved questions of his heart were mixed together. To be honest, he was exhausted, but he still had to fulfill his promise to visit Mr. Yagi. He realized he had a few minutes before leaving after taking a quick look at the clock on the wall of his bedroom. He could prepare himself in that time. Or perhaps. For a moment, he considered calling Uraraka as his gaze strayed to the phone that was on his desk. He hesitated at the thought. After all, when he felt her hand brush against him, he shouldn't have pulled away like that. The recollection of her words caused him to reevaluate their agreement, but he wanted to make things clear so she wouldn't think he was uncomfortable being near her. I don't want to get in the way of your heroic aspirations. With a sigh, Izuku grabbed the phone off his desk, not really planning to dial. After using his phone to take a picture of his room's wall, Midoriya busied himself by writing down and filing the notes he had made about the Dabi case. He was relieved that his mother was now safe and was very happy for Todoroki. He took a moment to glance at his analysis notebook after he had completed organizing the notes. He had written down all the heroes he was familiar with in it, and the page he was on was devoted to Momo Yaoyorozu. Along with notes like these, he had scrawled a brief sketch of her in her undercover attire and some information about her peculiarity. As long as she understands an object's properties, she can create it, similar to a character in a video game. She probably needs to eat a lot of carbohydrates to activate her quirk, if it's like other creation quirks I've seen. Questions to consider the next time. How did she figure out where Dabi was? He glanced absently through a few pages, taking in the sketches and annotations of people he had met in the previous few months. Details about the outfits, skills, and fighting techniques were included on every page. However, he was certain of the section he aimed to reach. The section of the notebook he had devoted to Uraraka finally caught his attention. Compared to the others, the drawings were more meticulously done and detailed. He had written admiring descriptions of her peculiarity, zero gravity. She has the ability to make anything she touches lose its gravity. Even large objects like building pillars or automobiles. He indicated a tiny remark in the margin. Could she use a commercial aircraft to accomplish this? He gave the question a quiet laugh. She gets sick when she uses her quirk too much, and I wish I could help her with that. His brief personal observations about her, however, were what captured his interest the most. More personal words, written almost shyly, appeared in the quirk data's margins. Smart, funny, kind, adorable, glistening. Midoriya stared at the drawing of Uraraka while keeping the notebook open in front of him. He had taken the time to capture that look, that kind grin that made him feel bright. He blushed as he looked out his window at the pink and orange sunset rising and rested his head on his arms. With a sigh, he felt the same pressure in his chest that he had experienced so often when he thought about her. He wanted to say so many things to her, but his words seemed to disappear before they could be spoken. He took another look at the drawing and saw how the delicate pencil lines attempted to convey more than just her appearance. They also attempted to convey the meaning she held for him and the feelings she sparked in him. He took out his phone and set a 9-minute timer after deciding he might need to sort his thoughts out a bit. Just 9 minutes to give himself permission to think freely about her without worrying about losing himself entirely in his emotions. His thoughts quickly returned to the memory he had been thinking about a lot lately. That cool night, right after the rain, in the moonlight, when they had told each other they were in love. Will you be patient while I respond? As the silver moonlight bounced off the puddles on the ground, Uraraka stood in front of him and asked, her face sweet but serious. He had released her hand at that moment, too anxious to hold it. However, he kept going back to that moment in his mind. He would not have let go, but he now knew exactly what he would have done. He would never have taken a step back, rather, he would have preferred to take her by the shoulders and gaze intently into her eyes. And give her a kiss. His heart would race every time he dreamed of it, thumping with the anticipation of what could have been if only he had been more resolute. A tiny kiss or brush of their lips would have been sufficient to soothe that doubt. Because he couldn't help but feel insecure now, despite her saying she liked him that night. She had kissed him on the corner of his lips back then, but it wasn't enough now. He would frequently bite his bottom lip in a mixture of hope and anxiety, wondering, what if she changed her mind? He didn't yearn for the kind of passionate, deep kisses that occasionally crept into his dreams and, despite appearances, actually caused him a great deal of distress. He would undoubtedly have a heart attack from one of those. No, to be more practical, perhaps all he wanted was a soft kiss that primarily expressed his emotions. I have a soft spot for her. Because he felt thankful, tender, and a desire to keep her safe most of the time. Perhaps at night, his curiosity or unconscious mind deceived him horribly with more adventurous dreams, giving him warmth and tingling sensations that he wasn't yet ready to process, only making him tense. But on that day, after experiencing guilt, he tried to concentrate on those easier-to-manage feelings. He remembered Uraraka telling him that she didn't want to divert his attention, so she had waited to discuss her feelings. And that meant a lot to him because she had prioritized him over herself, and now that he was in her shoes, waiting to act on his own emotions, he wanted to follow in her footsteps and not get in the way of her becoming the great hero he knew she was capable of being, but in reality, she was already. When fear and uncertainty had taken over his life, she had come to his rescue. She had remained by his side ever since, protecting him from loneliness. That was much appreciated by Midoriya. He couldn't help but think of her every time he took in the crisp air outside, felt the sun on his hands, or observed the breeze rustling the leaves in the trees. How Uraraka inspired him and gave him the willpower to keep going despite the pressure from the UA, just like those little details in nature. Entrance examination. It wasn't just that he liked her or thought she was so adorable that he wanted to kiss her. All of that combined to tell him that he already wanted to kiss her. Already. He was startled out of his brief reverie by the sound of his phone's alarm, and he was forced to sigh once more. He has been doing that lately. Just let out a sigh about these emotions he was suppressing for the time being. After putting his hero analysis notebook in his drawer and closing it, he departed from his room. Hawks took a seat in the tiny room in front of Rei Todoroki. White curtains that hardly let the sun in made the light from the windows feel chilly. Rei lay on the bed, pale and weak, her face a mixture of quiet resignation and tiredness. Hawks was aware that the woman he was seated across from had been through more than most people could ever experience. I'd like to ask you a few questions about anything you might have seen or heard while you were in captivity, Hawks said, his tone gentle but direct. It's not my intention to be insensitive, and I know you've been through a lot lately. Rei nodded slowly, as though the days had sapped her vitality, but her eyes were dim and nearly empty as she gazed at him. We could use this to track down the people who took you, Hawks went on, bending forward a little. Consequently, your children's safety would be guaranteed. I'm assuming you're concerned about that. Rei nodded once more, but this time with even less strength. Hawks gave himself a tiny smile, one that was equal parts admiration and relief. He tried to lighten the situation by saying, "I knew you were brave," but before he could stop himself, he muttered something under his breath, particularly remaining wed to Endeavor. Hawks found himself staring at Ray for a moment longer than he should have because of her faint smile, which was hardly perceptible, just a slight curvature of her lips. When he realized this, he immediately covered his mouth and pretended to be thinking deeply. All right. He pulled some pictures from his folder and tried to get back to the main topic, saying, "Now I'll show you some photos. If you recognize any of them, please let me know." Ray looked at each picture individually. Shigaraki, a white masked man, and other antagonists. She shook her head slowly after a few seconds. Hawks scowled for a second before gathering himself. Really? His voice carried a hint of disappointment, but he continued. "Have they ever permitted you to see any of your relatives? It may sound odd, but it's not uncommon for people with peculiarities that enable them to fabricate illusions or alter their appearance to be associated with criminals in recent years. It's possible that someone you know tried to influence you or asked you questions." Ray answered in a voice hardly audible above a whisper. "I only saw my youngest son and my husband when they sat me in front of a television. However, neither they nor I could hear what they were saying." Hawks nodded, recalling reports about the captors' broadcast of their demands. "Yes, I am aware of that," Hawks said. "In order to make their demands, they broadcast that. Apart from that, though, did you notice anything else odd? Have you ever been in a relationship?" Ray shook her head once more, her face still expressionless. She clarified, "I was kept in a room by myself the entire time. They fed me once a day through a tiny opening in the bottom of the door. They occasionally gave me waffles. One of them must have felt a little bad about keeping me there. Occasionally, they would even draw a smiley face on the waffles." Hawks was immediately drawn to that final detail. He made an effort to conceal his astonishment, but something about her captor's strange display of humanity unnerved him. "Did the waffles taste good enough?" he inquired, attempting to be lighthearted. To his surprise, Ray responded with a slight smile. "Yes. I've never had better waffles than those." However, as if regretting the confession, she immediately covered her mouth with both hands after saying that. Hawks smiled softly and said, "Don't worry. It's quite typical. People occasionally experience brief moments of joy when under a lot of stress. Like prisoners of war who gaze up through a small hole in the roof of their cell and say the blue sky is the most beautiful sky they have ever seen." Ray opened her mouth slowly, her smile vanishing as her sad, melancholy face took over. Hawks put his little notebook in his jacket and got to his feet. He declared, "I think that's enough for today. To check if you remember anything else, I'm afraid I'll have to return in a few days. Thank you for your cooperation." Ray nodded once more, her voice hardly audible above a whisper. "That's okay." Hawks looked at her one last time before making his way to the door. He was moved by Ray's vulnerability, which brought to mind his own mother, his early years, and how he had grown up in a society where morality was frequently ambiguous. "I've always believed that no one is genuinely good or bad," he said, stopping at the door. "Even so, society makes a concerted effort to distinguish between heroes and villains, between abiding by the law and breaking it. I feel like a bird in a cage sometimes, and I think I can be pretty bad at times, but people defend it. I believe I understand what you're saying." "I believed so. I said it for that reason." Hawks grinned and walked away. He thought twice as he looked straight ahead. What is this? A young hero and his mistreated wife trying to fall in love. Toshinori took a seat in his opulent chair, which, although comfortable, always seemed a little strange to him. Although he appreciated his American friend's hospitality, he didn't fit in with this extravagant way of life. He was lost in recollections when he heard a faint knock on the door. Seeing that nervous knock, he smiled and got to his feet. He said softly, "Come in," as he watched Midoriya enter the room, his face as always displaying a mixture of awe and nervousness. Midoriya started, looking around the room. "Oh, hello, sir. I thought for a second that I had messed up. I never imagined living in such a opulent location. However, your butler let me in after verifying your presence." Toshinori laughed quietly. "This isn't my home, actually. As a favor for something I did years ago, an old American friend of mine who had lived here in Japan for a while almost made me stay. However, I will shortly be relocating to a more modest residence. Now that I have a new job, something cozier." Midoriya smiled with his usual inquisitiveness. "If I inquire about that job, I assume you'll tell me it's a secret." With a playful expression on his face, Toshinori squinted. "For the time being, it is, but young Midoriya, you will learn the truth eventually." The living room was furnished with comfortable chairs that they both occupied. Despite the fact that they were more than just friends, there was a cozy sense of familiarity in the air between them. Toshinori's gaze on Midoriya was distinctly paternal, as if he wanted to shield him from the outside world and the shadows he was all too familiar with. Toshinori started off with a tone of admiration. "I heard from Tsukauchi that you managed to find the mother of young Todoroki. You conducted outstanding fieldwork and came to some very wise conclusions. I have to admit, young Midoriya, you've shocked me once more. However, I didn't expect you to be any less." With a slight flush, Midoriya glanced down at his hands. "In fact, I received a great deal of assistance and too much luck," he said, attempting, as usual, to minimize his accomplishments. As though reprimanding a child, Toshinori held his hands up in the air. "Excessive humility. It's illogical," with a broad smile, he exclaimed. "You have to learn to appreciate your own accomplishments when they are due." "Okay." Midoriya wrote in a tiny pocket notebook, and Toshinori gave a little sigh of frustration. For a brief moment, the mood was light, but then Midoriya spoke again, this time with a more serious expression. "By the way, sir, it seems like you've been a little aloof lately. Is everything all right?" Midoriya inquired, a little alarmed. Toshinori was caught off guard by the question. His mind flashed back to the underground bunker he had explored in the dark, lit only by his flashlight, and to the secret plans Hawks had just shown him. He had been looking into it. Things he was unable to share with Midoriya, not just yet. "Yes, I have had a lot on my plate, but it's nothing to worry about," he said, averting his eyes for a moment. Midoriya scowled, clearly worried. That purity and resolve Toshinori had long admired were mirrored in his eyes. "That's all." With a lowered voice, Midoriya added, "You've done so much for me without asking for anything in return. And I want to help you for once. I was completely confused when we first met. Therefore, I can help you in any way I can, no matter how small. Do not hesitate to tell me, please." Toshinori tightened his hand on his knee. Midoriya had always been this way. Ready to lend a hand, even if it meant taking on a lot of responsibility. He asked himself, should I tell him now? No, for someone so young, it was too much to bear. He was aware that Midoriya would go to any lengths for him, even if it meant risking harm, and he did not want that. He thought back to the first time he had met him. "I believe I started to view All Might as a sort of father figure after my father moved out." He had been marked by those words, spoken so earnestly. Then he recalled Night Eye's icy voice in his head, almost as a reprimand. He seemed to be reprimanded once more for being totally sentimental and foolish. Shaking off those thoughts, Toshinori covered his mouth and looked away, but after a long silence, he finally said something. "Young Midoriya, if there is anything you could do." "What is it?" Midoriya leaned forward in his chair expectantly and asked. Toshinori dropped his hand and smiled warmly at him, expressing gratitude, love, and a strong bond. He pulled out a small bento box with white bunnies wrapped in a blue cloth and said, "Eat with me whenever I ask you." Midoriya smiled back, though he didn't quite get it. "Obviously, sir." Always, unsettling shadows were cast over the people occupying the room by the dim light of a lamp that flickered in the corner. Shigaraki stood in the middle, his pale fingers drumming on the chair's arm as he looked around with a barely contained look of satisfaction. He whispered, letting each word hang in the air before continuing, "So we keep the hostage, and now we have an infiltrator with the number 2 hero. Nicely considered, Kurogiri." Kurogiri gave a soft nod in his customary composed manner. Everywhere he looked, the air seemed denser, as though a veil of smoke hung over him, shrouding him in a haze of mystery. "Additionally, we're hiding right under their noses," Dabi said, his lighthearted tone belying the seriousness of the situation. "The fact that we are in the home he purchased for his beloved Shoto will never be suspected by Endeavor." Shigaraki became irritated. "You can't be so reckless just because everything went smoothly. I had to leave my house because of your carelessness," he chastised, his eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and disapproval. Dabi simply grinned wearily in his eternal apathy, but Kurogiri, composed as ever, stepped in before he could reply. "Tamura Shigaraki, forget it for the time being." His tone was low, almost as if he didn't want to agitate anyone. "Consider it this way. Dabi is now forced to assist you with your plan, and in addition to that, you've expressed your desire to leave that house for the past 4 years. Shigaraki inhaled deeply, acknowledging the veracity of those remarks. Memories of his own suffering flooded his old home, which he had come to despise. Maybe, deep down, leaving it behind had been a relief. There was a trace of resentment in his voice as he finally acknowledged, "Yeah, that's true." Twice's desperate voice cut through the conversation, changing the mood of the room. "Hi. Hello," he yelled, holding up both hands as though he were in a dire situation. "If Endeavor wants to have sex with his wife, what should I do? That is definitely not what I signed up for." The room responded to the remark in a variety of ways. With his unwavering composure, Dobby let out a little sardonic chuckle before answering. In the same icy tone that accompanied him at all times, he said, "Don't worry. Endeavor saw his wife only as a way to produce an heir who would be greater than All Might. He probably won't become affectionate with her. Never in 1,000 years." Twice, despite being relieved by the answer, he was unable to control his exaggeration. "It is such a relief. How do you know all of that, though?" With his eyes wide open and more nervous than interested, he asked. Dobby turned away, his eyes glimmering with a deep, almost nostalgic gleam as he spoke. "To put it mildly, I studied the Todorokis for a while." Shigaraki raised an eyebrow in Dobby's direction. There was an odd feeling in the air after saying that. However, Dobby went on, "Just start crying if her son Shoto or either of the other two ask you questions and you don't know how to respond. After what happened, they won't think it's strange." "How gloomy. I'm hoping it doesn't have an impact on me." Uraraka lay on her room's carpet, letting out a slow breath as she used her quirk to raise her bed with the touch of 5 fingers once more. She had made the decision to engage in this type of training in order to strengthen her endurance and master her control over gravity. Her primary objective was straightforward but far from straightforward: to progressively lower objects while precisely regulating the rate at which they regained their weight. She had already made some progress, but it was very challenging to accomplish without experiencing some negative effects from overusing her quirk. Uraraka had started to perspire after hours of practice, but she wasn't prepared to give up just yet. Her brow furrowed in concentration, but after a while her thoughts wandered, wondering why she was exerting herself so much. Deku. She had a clear mental picture of his charming smile, as though he were actually there, and then there was the subsequent explosion. Last but not least, Hatsume, her chest against his. She scowled more deeply. She also recalled. Deku had casually told the others, "I see her every week for innovations." Uraraka pushed her bed a bit too hard, suppressing a tiny wave of negative emotion, and it crashed into the ceiling with a dull thud. Plaster fragments fell onto the bed. "Oh!" Shocked by her own carelessness, she yelled. She felt a mixture of regret and embarrassment as she considered fixing that later. Fortunately, her father had taught her how to perform that type of repair work. She sighed softly and pressed the tips of her fingers together in front of her face as she slowly lowered the bed back down. There was a strange comfort in the darkness beneath the bed, a momentary escape from her racing mind. But no matter how hard she tried to find some calm, the picture of Deku kept coming back to her. A long strand of hair fell across her face as she turned her head slightly. She fixed her gaze on it as though the insignificant detail had taken her back in time. She recalled the moment on the train when Deku kissed her hair, a daring gesture for someone as bashful as he was. It had been so awkward, yet so charming. Though short, the moment had a profound impact. The warmth of that moment was still there in her heart, a soft flutter. Uraraka picked up the hair with her fingers without thinking and, almost reflexively, brought it to her lips, kissing gently where she thought Deku's lips had touched. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the tenderness of that memory fill her. Unaware of it, a gentle smile curved her lips. She opened her eyes once more to see Deku's face next to her, staring at her with those gentle emerald eyes that were full of that well-known concern for other people. "Ah! Why must he always look so adorable in my dreams?" Uraraka ruffled her hair in mild frustration as she thought. It was difficult for her to organize her thoughts because she was experiencing so many emotions at once. What on earth was she doing? She was still thinking a lot about her family's financial status. Despite their best efforts to hide it with smiles, Uraraka could see the signs of exhaustion on her parents' faces. Fine lines beneath their eyes and a dullness in their eyes. She longed to do more to help, but she was still unsure of how to proceed at this time. And now, for some reason, Deku was also contributing to those concerns. Even though they made him appear adorable and enigmatic, she couldn't help but worry about the dark circles under his eyes, which were subtle but noticeable and served as a silent reminder that he was carrying his own burdens. Was his quirk making him push himself too hard? Feeling like he had to put in twice as much effort as everyone else must be difficult for him. Was his sleep being affected by his anxiety, though? Did she have anything to offer him? Uraraka's face showed a trace of sadness, but every time she tried to check on him, he seemed to pull away, So how could she help? Did he have a grievance? Or did he have a secret from her? That was probably in her head, and she didn't want to believe it. But why did she occasionally feel this way? Even though they had both been open and honest about their feelings, why did she still feel so insecure? With Deku, she was certain that everything would always be crystal clear. She couldn't even think of a circumstance in which she would actually be suspicious of him. For instance, the Hatsume situation. According to Deku, he only considered her a friend and was awaiting a response from the person he truly liked. What else was she in need of? Would she actually turn into one of those girls who get envious of their boyfriend's social life? Uraraka gave a forceful shake of her head. In addition, he wasn't yet her boyfriend, but now she was beginning to wish he hadn't. To avoid distractions, why hadn't she simply proposed delaying the dating process until after the test? A fool. A fool. A fool. She pounded her fists lightly against her head. The Deku she pictured at her side seemed to sense her emotions because he put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, as though to reassure her that everything would be all right. He was only a few inches away when Uraraka rolled onto her side in the direction of her reverie. How might she help him to stop worrying so much and have faith that everything would work out? Happy that this Deku wasn't pulling away, she caressed his cheek tenderly while pondering, lost in those stunning green eyes. And how could she help herself to stop feeling so insecure and to reaffirm her own feelings? She closed her eyes and imagined Deku cradling her face as she began to flush. He gently brushed their noses together and then drew her to his lips. Despite being a dream, that kiss provided her with all she needed at that precise moment. Safety, love, and a bond that went beyond words. To be honest with herself, she had been considering kissing him every morning when she saw him, putting his all into getting into UA. Seeing him so intent on his objective, with that resolute look on his face, made her heart melt. It was a growing desire. Indeed. It was obvious. Uraraka persuaded herself. She desired to reaffirm her feelings by sharing a connection with Deku. Because deeds spoke louder than words, which could be ephemeral. She desired for their bond to be distinct from any friendship he might have with another person. She also hoped that his actions would somehow convey to her that she was as important to him as his desire to become a hero, if that was not too much to ask. Uraraka clenched her fists gently against her chest as the Deku in her dream started to move his lips slightly. For some reason, she thought Deku would make a fantastic kisser despite his shy nature. Uraraka's feet slowly drew back outside the bed until they were concealed by the covers, as though everything she wanted about Deku had to stay hidden beneath her bed. Then Uraraka, filled with immense joy, held her cheeks. In actuality, she wouldn't give a damn if Deku ended up being a horrible kisser. It would be ideal as long as it was with him and she could express to him even a small portion of her desires and emotions. Around him, everything was dark. Bakugo had fallen back into the muck of the monster that had imprisoned him. This time, however, he felt as though he was in a huge pool of that viscous substance. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to use his quirk to break free. Even though his hands were scratching at the surface, he kept slipping back down. Eventually, he felt only one hand above the surface as he sank farther into the darkness. Then he recognized the voice. "Hey, how did you end up trapped there?" Kirishima said in a relaxed tone. "Don't worry, I'm here now. Hold on tight. I'll assist you." Bakugo grasped the helpful arm without giving it much thought, feeling for the first time that his body was no longer sinking. To his astonishment and annoyance, however, the first thing he saw upon emerging was the worthless Deku staring at him with worry and wearing an odd metal device that resembled a smile. "What on earth?" Bakugo grumbled, confused and angry. "How are you?" "I'm sorry, Kachan," Deku asked, pulling at his hand to help him up, but Bakugo swatted him away. "I knew you wouldn't accept my assistance if I didn't use a voice modifier." Bakugo leapt to his feet and attempted to use his quirk to make warning explosions in his palms, but it was unsuccessful. So all he could do was shout. "As though I require a loser's assistance." He let out an angry roar. "I find it infuriating that you believe you are smarter than me. If it's easier for you, get lost or die already." "However, Kachan, are you hard of hearing?" Deku scowled a little. He had lost the customary submissiveness that had previously defined him. He had a fixed expression. "All right, Kachan," Deku said emphatically, "then I will no longer assist you." Bakugo was taken aback. The idiot was usually far more obnoxious and persistent. Deku's footsteps echoed in the silence as he began to move away. "Hi!" Bakugo called out to get his attention, but he was stopped when someone grabbed him by the arm. A strange girl with bright eyes and an oddly excited smile was staring at him when he turned suddenly. "Wait, Bakugo!" she uttered sharply. Become my boyfriend. Bakugo attempted to shake her off his arm, but his eyes widened in confusion. Why in the world are you saying this? He shouted, but a second girl came up and grabbed his other arm. No, I was the first to see him, she objected while maintaining the same intense gaze on him. Then more showed up. Girls started to crowd around him one by one, all saying the same thing, arguing with one another, and raising their voices to a frantic crescendo. They started crushing him before he could react, forcing him back into the black sludge that had imprisoned him. Where in the world are these fucking extras from? He yelled as the weight of them all pressed him down, and he struggled to get away. Leave me alone, please. Bakugo felt his body sink once more as the girls continued to press down. However, he noticed something else this time before everything darkened. The round-faced girl was now with Deku as he continued to walk away in silence. She took his hand, and they walked forward together without turning around. Hi. The words became stuck in his throat as he attempted to yell. All of a sudden, everything turned dark. Bakugo snapped out of it. A monotonous rhythm was created by the rain tapping softly against his room's window. Bakugo was brushing his teeth briskly a moment later. As if that fucking nonsense matters to me. What a foolish dream. He practically spit toothpaste all over the place. Katsuki. From the opposite side of the house, his mother's voice could be heard. Avoid getting up too early and shouting. Regretfully, we haven't been able to assist much today due to the rain. Mina thought calmly as she spun on one foot, her hands behind her neck. It bothers me. Sunny days are what I like. While some of the volunteers were putting on rain boots or looking in their backpacks for their umbrellas, all of the volunteers were sheltering beneath the portion of the bridge that had already been restored. Ojiro resigned himself. Well, we will have to work out indoors at the school gym. Kirishima remarked, taking a deep breath. The only thing I like about the rain is that when it clears up, the atmosphere feels really clean afterwards. All of the pollution, that is. I also enjoy it. I think it's actually my favorite weather, Midoriya said excitedly, blushing a little when he recalled that Uraraka and he had confessed their feelings on a night like that. Additionally, it almost seems inspirational to watch the leaves move in the cool breeze. At times, Uraraka's voice sounded charmingly soft and kind, and she couldn't help but smile as she looked for her umbrella in her backpack while facing away. Bakugo found it annoying to see and hear Deku at that precise moment, though he wasn't sure if it was due to the weird dream he was having. Deku. What on earth are you talking about? Bakugo snarled, his voice piercing the quiet with annoyance. The foliage? The wind? Then he regarded him with contempt and derision. You sound like a lady, so I hope the girl you confessed to is open to being the man in the relationship. Midoriya was at a loss for words. Although Kachan had previously made fun of him for using sensitive language, did what he said actually sound a little feminine? Did Uraraka share this opinion? He looked at her covertly from behind and became a little concerned. Kirishima, who always tries to lighten the mood with his cheerful demeanor, stepped in before he could overthink it any further. He smiled enthusiastically and with approval, saying, I don't think so, Bakugo. In my opinion, Midoriya's statement resembled a haiku. After a brief pause, Kirishima started counting the syllables while a Japanese flag and fictitious waves rose in the background. However, he soon became weary and abruptly shifted the topic with his customary zeal. He said abruptly, recalling something crucial, oh, by the way, I'm counting on you all to support our band tonight. He smiled broadly, and his face brightened even more. We're a little anxious because this will be our first performance in the competition, correct? He smiled as he turned to Bakugo, hoping the blonde would stand by him. But Bakugo just turned his head away. Not to be deterred, Kirishima went on, we've all worked really hard, and I think it would be a good way to distress a bit before the upcoming exam. A smile came to Uraraka's face. That is all. Let's all go together. What are your thoughts? But as Suyu politely excused herself and opened her umbrella, her cool, collected voice cut through the tension. Calmly, she said, I'm sorry, but I can't go. I hope you all have fun, but I have to look after my younger siblings until late. She held up her hand in a final salutation and started to move in the rain, her steps solid but a little lonesome. Because of her duty to her younger siblings, Uraraka felt that Suyu's loneliness, despite her pleasant demeanor, was a little unfair. Her thoughts were interrupted by Ojiro waving goodbye and holding a happy floating umbrella, most likely Hagakuri's. All right, we can leave. So, always courteous, Ojiro said, we'll see you there. Hagakuri's pink umbrella was added, swaying slightly as though to wave, we'll be supporting you. Yes. I'm grateful. Kirishima waved goodbye with his typical vigor. See you tonight. Uraraka turned to face Midoriya at that moment, excited about the prospect of spending time with him and the others. Deku. What are your thoughts? Are you leaving? She smiled as she asked, approaching a bit closer than he had anticipated, making him take a step back in shock at her sudden proximity. As usual, Midoriya blushed a little when he saw how excited she was, but as he answered, his face became a little more serious. He lowered his voice a little and said, I apologize, Uraraka, but I already committed to practicing at Todoroki's house. He can't go out at the moment because of a family situation, which makes me a little concerned that he feels lonely. His answer caused Uraraka's face to slightly darken, and her smile momentarily vanished. Disappointment was inevitable because she had been so thrilled about the prospect of sharing this moment with Deku. Oh, was all she could manage to say while concealing her disappointment. It also caused her to wonder why she was not able to be as good of a friend as he was. She briefly considered asking Sue if she could come to her house the next time, but then suddenly she remembered Himiko Toga, when she was still a typical schoolgirl and they had strolled together laughing. Deku briefly considered whether he should alter his plans with Todoroki after noticing something in her expression, but before he could respond, Kirishima interrupted once more to try to make things clear. You guys are unable to go? With a hint of doubt in his eyes and an optimistic tone, he asked. Hearing the question, Uraraka regained her normal vigor and shook her head slightly. She forced a smile because she didn't want the others to see how disappointed she was. Deku seems to have plans already, but I'm game, she said, smiling broadly, albeit maybe a little more artificially than usual. Oh, I see. Kirishima remarked, I've already sent the information to our group chat, as she relaxed a little. The Aoyama mansion is the location. Home. Shocked, Uraraka repeated. Kirishima started out by giving more information, stating that the occasion was a band competition and party for UA applicants. Although Midoriya was glad that Uraraka had not been deterred by his rejection, he wondered right away who Uraraka would spend the entire time with if her best friend Tsuyu wasn't present. He imagined Uraraka sitting in a corner, dejected and alone, with small groups of people talking among themselves, but not her. Midoriya instantly shook his head. No, he told himself Uraraka was much friendlier than he was. Without a doubt, she would immediately find someone to talk to. One of her gifts was that. In his mind, a taller figure than Uraraka now materialized, engaging in animated conversation with her. They were both laughing. Deku's smile vanished as he pressed his backpack sleeve this time, but he chose not to think about it any longer and put his backpack down. Oh no, Mina sighed to herself, but a teasing smile appeared on her lips as she said, I forgot my umbrella again. Well, it's irrelevant. She posed in a racing position, her legs bent, as if she were about to run into the rain at full speed. I'll have to run to the station. Eyes wide, Kirishima stepped forward instantly. In this rain? He shouted, startled. What is the matter? Mina shook her body a little and stretched her legs before asking in a relaxed tone. Kirishima dragged his umbrella out firmly. Not at all. You can't do that, can you? All you'll do is get a cold and soak your clothes. We can always share mine, you know. We're good friends, after all, Ashido. He added with a gleam of friendliness, but paused to reflect. However, it appears that you've developed the habit of forgetting it. Mina smiled and said, maybe I do it on purpose so I can walk with you. She was attempting to tease Kirishima with playful nudges and was successful in pushing him slightly in the direction of the rain. Look, I'm getting soaked. Wait until I open it, at the very least. Sorry, Mina said, giggling at her friend's response. After sharing a laugh, they opened the umbrella and started walking together under its cover. Uraraka, who had been observing the exchange, was struck by how closely they walked, their shoulders lightly grazing one another. She thought they appeared to be enjoying themselves and that their smiles looked particularly adorable together. She wished with all her heart that she could share a similarly beautiful moment as she looked at the umbrella in her hand and then noticed Deku turned away, searching through his backpack. In the meantime, Bakugo, who appeared to be having trouble with his tangled umbrella, couldn't help but cast a sidelong glance at the two people who were still with him. Uraraka dared to whisper in front of Deku, you can always share my umbrella if you forgot yours. When Izuku looked up, Uraraka's skirt was nearly in front of his face. His hand briefly released the corner of the yellow raincoat he had finally located at the bottom of his backpack. Sometimes he cursed himself for carrying so much stuff. She's too near. All of his alarms went off as he let out a mental scream. He was cruelly reminded in his mind of a rather risque dream in which he had buried his face in Uraraka's waist and wrapped his arms around it. With his back to her, He put on the raincoat as fast as he had pulled it up to cover his flushed face. Hiraka, thank you. You're very kind, but as you can see, I brought my raincoat, he stammered anxiously. Hearing his response, Uraraka couldn't help but feel a little disheartened. Although it had been a shy attempt to approach him, he appeared more interested in maintaining his distance. With a smile that stopped short of her eyes, she answered, "Yeah, I see that." Izuku couldn't help but notice Uraraka's somewhat dejected tone despite the abrupt tension, and he wondered if he should inquire as to whether everything was all right. When Bakugo opened the umbrella, the other two turned to watch him, seemingly winning the battle with the umbrella. He gave Deku a serious look, which Izuku caught from the side, before leaving into the rain. Uraraka pointed down the path in an attempt to lighten the awkwardness of the situation. In an attempt to ease the tension, she cheerfully suggested, "It's a little early, but we should start heading out too." But Deku seemed to be deep in thought. He broke the silence after a moment. "I apologize, Uraraka. May I proceed?" She gave him a startled look. "What? Mister?" With a slightly more enthusiastic tone, he explained, "Yagi suggested I try running to wherever I need to go instead of taking transport." "Really?" Incredulous, she said. "Will you brave the rain to make it to school? But aren't you going too far, Deku?" Deku saw where Uraraka's hands were when she pressed her umbrella to her chest. Izuku smiled a little as he remembered how his mother used to hold tissues to her chest when she was anxious. "Thanks for your concern, Uraraka, but I'm fine." Reaching a hand to her shoulder, he reassured her, but it hung in midair. "It's simply that. I want to continue challenging myself to the fullest." He made a fist to conceal his sudden confidence as he said, "You know, plus ultra." Uraraka thought that was pretty adorable and did her best to return his smile. "All right, Deku. Then, give it your all," she answered, smiling as she imitated his fist motion. "Yes, I'll see you tomorrow." As Uraraka, wearing a yellow raincoat, watched him flee, he experienced an odd feeling. The rain appeared to stop for a second, and the world around her became quiet. As she saw Deku running, she couldn't help but feel a tiny premonition rise in her chest. It seemed like he would vanish into the rain if she didn't stop him now. However, that sensation was fleeting, and then things went back to normal. She held up her hand to call him back, but she quickly changed her mind because she believed it would be risky to divert his attention at this time because the street was wet and might become slick. Bakugo watched Deku run past him, taking in the scene, and then he continued on toward the station, watching Deku vanish before his eyes. The humidity from the rain outside made things uncomfortable, and the train carriages were fairly packed. People pushed one another as they went by, got on, and got off, and the windows were fogged up. Further ahead, Uraraka could see a spiky blonde head of hair protruding from her position. Bakugo was the first person that came to mind, but then she recalled that Kirishima had a similar hairstyle. She smiled a little, amusedly, thinking that perhaps it was becoming a trend. But that brief diversion was short-lived. Suddenly, she had an odd feeling about the man behind her. She tried to move away, but she was surrounded by people, making it challenging to shift positions. "Is he pressing up against me on purpose?" she asked herself. She was beginning to think she wasn't imagining it, but she didn't want to stir up unnecessary drama. She became more uneasy when she detected the disagreeable combination of coffee and cigarettes in the man's breath, along with an ill-fated, "sorry," as he let someone else go. Unfortunately, this was not the first time that she had experienced this, and Uraraka was always afraid to speak up. A misunderstanding like this made her think of her father, and she would never want him to be wrongfully accused of something inappropriate. Men being falsely accused must be terrible, and she detested seeing unhappy people. The train abruptly stopped, and Uraraka had the almost certain impression that the man behind her had seized the opportunity to close in. "Dear passengers. We apologize for the abrupt stop. It was caused by Mount Lady confronting a villain, both of whom crossed the train tracks a moment ago, but the situation has been resolved. Thank you for your understanding." The train continued on its way, but the man behind her exploited the pause once more to approach. Refusing to give in to her frustration, Uraraka closed her eyes. If Deku were here. She thought for a moment, picturing how he always appeared when things got tough. Then she opened her eyes, though. What was she contemplating? Deku wasn't necessary to save her. She had put in a lot of training to be able to defend herself, so how could she ever become a hero if she didn't start acting with that confidence? Then she prepared to turn and face the man. Before she could respond, however, a well-known voice broke through the train's muttering. "Hi, old man, what on earth do you think you're doing? Come on over there, there's plenty of room." The other passengers turned to stare at the man with disapproval. Clutching his briefcase like a shield, the man hurried to the next carriage, obviously uncomfortable and embarrassed. Still a little anxious but appreciative, Uraraka used the occasion to approach Bakugo. Uraraka bowed her head before him and said, "Thank you so much. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming, but I was about to say something." Bakugo averted his gaze with his customary lack of interest. He growled, then glared at her and added, annoyed, "And you? It's just that I can't stand shabby old men like that. If something doesn't feel right, speak up. You get nothing by remaining silent. And you believe that's how you'll get into the hero course? Keep me from laughing." Uraraka laughed uneasily, still experiencing a mixture of relief and embarrassment. "You are correct. I swear that the next time, I won't overthink it." Bakugo grunted, but before he turned away, he made another remark that was audible to everyone in the train car. "And you are all cowards for witnessing what transpired and doing nothing." Uraraka quickly stepped in to try to calm the passengers down after Bakugo's remarks. "Oh no, I doubt anyone else saw, you know me, so you saw it?" Uraraka made an effort to make the others feel better by apologizing. Bakugo, however, was unfazed. His last remarks were more solemn, as though he were thinking to himself. He muttered, "I can't stand people who call themselves good, but hesitate when it's time to act," before making his way to the train car's door. "What the hell?" he added. "Am I now beginning to interfere like that fool?" He said, "Idiot," to refer to Deku, which surprised Uraraka a little, but putting that aside for a moment, she couldn't help but smile as she observed Bakugo's back, and for a split second, it appeared as though Deku's silhouette crossed over his. Bakugo was thoughtful in his own way. "If you're not getting off, old lady, get out of the doorway." Bakugo yelled at an old woman in front of him. "Or disembark from the train." "Or perhaps not," Uraraka withdrew. The elderly woman replied politely, offering him a chocolate pastry, which he accepted grudgingly before attempting to proceed, only to become trapped between the doors and struggle to escape. "You should have a good breakfast in the morning, or you'll be in a bad mood all day," she said. "Look at what you did, elderly woman. Was this what you were hoping for? Get lost now." From the other side of the door, he shouted. "Enjoy it." The woman smiled unconcernedly as the train began to move. It was impossible for Uraraka not to laugh. She was unaware of Bakugo's comical abilities. Then she remembered what he had said, "And you, if something doesn't feel right, speak up. You get nothing by remaining silent." Bakugo had been observing them when Deku had fled in the rain. Is it possible that he was discussing my predicament with Deku as well? The city was now covered in a light drizzle, and the traffic lights glowed like a canvas of ephemeral hues as they reflected off the damp asphalt. The rhythmic sound of Izuku's sneakers on the pavement filled the air as he ran through the streets, breathing steadily. He had made the decision to continue training in spite of the bad weather, even though his thoughts occasionally strayed. He believed he had seen Mount Lady pursuing a villain some time ago, but he already had enough notes about her from the day of her debut, and she didn't currently pique his interest. His thoughts strayed to a recent instance in which his hand had raised toward Uraraka's shoulder almost reflexively. He had been a few centimeters away from touching her when he stopped. Perhaps that would have been a suitable time to. Izuku let himself become engrossed in the fantasy of the kiss that might have come without warning. A white limousine, meanwhile, raced through the streets at the same quick speed as Izuku's heart. Uraraka typically wears lip gloss, so it would have tasted sweet, perhaps like cherries. If he had dared, her cheeks, which were already rosy and soft like mochi, would have flushed even more. Izuku's face burned with shame as he covered his mouth, thinking, she was adorable in every way. Nevertheless, he continued to run, maintaining a steady pace in spite of the daydream that engulfed him. The limousine kept moving, dodging automobiles. It appeared to be moving quickly. Still absorbed in his thoughts, Izuku conjured up a different version of the same scene. What if he had been braver than simply raising his hand? He could have put his arm around her waist and gently drawn her in instead of reaching for her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her body through her wet clothing. Her warmth would have outweighed the cold outside, and perhaps, just perhaps, he would have had the guts to kiss her. The traffic light had changed, and the car was drawing nearer. Perhaps, so that I could prove Kachan's mistake. "You sound like quite a lady," he recalled, scowling a little. "I hope the girl you confessed to is willing to be the man in the relationship." He was startled out of his reverie by the sound of tires screeching and a car horn. Midoriya glanced around hastily. It was accurate. The pedestrian light was red when he crossed. "Oh, I'm very sorry. I apologize sincerely." Izuku was already halfway across, so he could only run to the other side and bow his head slightly in apology, both scared and grateful that he hadn't caused an accident. The driver of the limousine was understanding and held up his hand to the boy, but when he heard the passenger window roll down, he became a little uneasy. What was the purpose of that? Observing the scene from the rear seat, Sir Night-Eye asked gravely, "You know I don't tolerate surprises. Or was there something really funny that made it worth it? Tell me." "I apologize, sir. Nothing funny. A child was the one who abruptly crossed, but now we're on the move." The vehicle started up again. Night-Eye watched the young man as he turned toward his tinted window. He could only see him from behind, but he was drawn to his determined manner and the yellow raincoat. He didn't care until he gave himself permission to smile a little. Mirio used to run even when it rained. By the end of the afternoon, the Todoroki household was starting to disappear into the night sky, with only the distant flickering lights providing illumination. Izuku and Todoroki were engaged in a well-coordinated sparring session in the spacious training room. Punches and kicks reverberated throughout the room, accompanied by the piercing cadence of their ragged breathing. They were both perspiring, and their faces bore the scars of their labors. Even though they moved fluidly, Midoriya was still troubled by the recent limo accident. He had been uneasy after nearly causing an accident, and this uneasiness made him pay closer attention to every blow and every motion. Shoto, on the other hand, appeared more aloof and distracted, which led him to forget his responsibilities at a crucial time. Izuku kicked Todoroki hard almost without noticing, and because he couldn't move in time, he hit the ground with a dull thud. "Ah, I apologize." Concerned that he had gone too far, Midoriya promptly apologized. "I believe I went too far, since it's only practice." He was about to extend his hand to assist him in standing up, but he quickly withdrew it out of concern that Todoroki would perceive it as patronizing. But to his astonishment, Todoroki reached out to him. As he accepted the assistance to get back on his feet, Todoroki remarked, "You've definitely improved a lot, Midoriya. However, don't you feel that the training is going too far?" He stretched as he added, "You follow a routine that is nearly as rigorous as the ones my father made me follow when I first fled from him." Izuku gave him a serious look. He sensed Todoroki's burden, a shadow of his past that never went away. "That's all." The optimistic response from Midoriya was, "I want to give it my best effort." Todoroki stood motionless, thinking, his gaze on the ground as he mentally repeated those words, "my best effort." "By the way, how are things going?" Izuku, sensing the tension in the air, asked cautiously. But he immediately regretted bringing it up, when he saw that Todoroki did not answer right away. "I apologize. Perhaps you don't want to discuss it. If you don't want to, don't feel pressured to." With a hint of resignation in his eyes, Shoto slowly raised his head. "No, everything is all right. I should talk to someone, according to my sister. It's simply, I don't want you to feel like my problems should be yours." Todoroki rubbed the back of his neck, still wearing his serious expression, and for a moment, Midoriya was reminded of Uraraka making a similar gesture when downplaying her own troubles. Todoroki still worries about not burdening others despite everything he's been through. Shoto let out a long sigh and looked off into space. "I met my father earlier, and I informed him of this." Silently, Midoriya listened to Todoroki recount the conversation with endeavor. "After all these years of giving up, it doesn't make sense to think you could defeat All Might. I also think you decided long ago that your work as a hero was far more important than your family. I won't ask what you plan to do if the deadline passed and you couldn't find Dabi because there's no point. Shoto, you have to understand." "No, now I understand. We all live far away from you, so if this family is ever happy, it will be because of that. I'll take your earlier offer and move in with my mother once she's a little better. You know, I've been dreaming that we're all eating together like a typical family, but you're always missing." Shoto sighed. "In this manner, you can focus entirely on what you have determined to be more important." Midoriya gazed at him, first worried, then dejected. "I see. So, it's likely you'll never forgive your father." "That's right, Midoriya. In that regard, I believe I will always agree with my brother." Todoroki sighed once more. "I hope that this does not give the impression that I am a bad person." "No, not at all," Midoriya answered immediately, but he took a moment to think, though. He went on, more circumspectly this time. "I believe it would be difficult for someone who is unfamiliar with your circumstances to distinguish between the hero endeavor and the choices he made in his private life." Shoto gave a slow nod. "That makes sense. My sister, who has witnessed everything firsthand, hasn't made the decision to cut all ties with him. She's probably a lot kinder than I will ever be." Reflecting on the moments he had witnessed Todoroki engage with his sister Fuyumi, Midoriya grinned. the admiration evident in his eyes. The way you look at your sister when she smiles makes me believe that you secretly wish you were a little bit like her. Perhaps you simply need more time to see things differently. I don't think that's entirely true, Midoriya pondered. There was a brief period of silence while Todoroki appeared to consider what Midoriya had just said. Midoriya. Todoroki made eye contact with him this time. Have you ever considered that? What he meant was unclear to Izuku. Have you ever considered which is more significant to you, your personal relationships or becoming a hero? Midoriya was surprised when the words seemed to get stuck in his throat even though he thought he could respond immediately. After that, he reflected on a number of incidents, including All Might saving people in that old video he had loved as a child, his mother crying repeatedly, Uraraka, Mr. Yagi, Kachan, Todoroki himself, Gran Torino, and Shota Aizawa on television. Ultimately, two memories stood out above the others. Uraraka's apology to him for using her quirk on him after saving him, and Mr. Toshinori's statement that he could become a hero. Both times, he was moved to tears. Izuku's chest ached once more, and he seemed to be limited to making a hoarse, incomprehensible sound that Todoroki attempted to interpret. I've always thought that deeds speak louder than words, and the fact that you're here, training with me, rather than with the girl you like, says something about your priorities. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Todoroki went on in his customary thoughtful tone. But that's also because you're important to me, Todoroki, Izuku said very earnestly. I like to hang out with you, and you're my best friend. Even the most aloof people were disarmed by Midoriya's ability to speak his mind without hesitation, and this was evident in the slight raise of Todoroki's eyebrows. But now that I think about it, perhaps I've made Uraraka feel a little left out of my priorities because I've been so focused on studying for the UA entrance exam. I haven't resented it as much because she's always on my mind, Midoriya added, blushing slightly. It was both wonderful and embarrassing to have someone on your mind all the time, the author writes. In his thoughts, in his dreams. In nature and in the kind expressions of others. Todoroki made the practical suggestion, you could call her and let her know before there's a misunderstanding, but he saw Midoriya shake his head right away. The construction workers announced that they were attending a party that was being hosted by a man named Aoyama, who extended an invitation to anyone registering to take the UA entrance exam and mentioned that amateur bands would be competing. Then Midoriya thought of something. He said excitedly, perhaps we could go for a while, but quickly corrected himself after noticing Todoroki's composed demeanor. Oh, but I guess that's too loud for someone as quiet as you, Todoroki, he said. Todoroki surprised him by putting a hand to his chin and appearing thoughtful. To be honest, I've always wanted to see a band perform live, but up until now, I've only been able to watch them on videos, Todoroki said gravely. Are you serious? I never thought, Midoriya, you should not judge a book by its cover. You're correct. But what about your mother? She is currently being kept company by Fuyumi and Natsuo. The false Rei Todoroki was in her bed at the time, covering her mouth to keep from laughing while she and Natsuo watched a movie in the dark. It would be his first time attending a party with people his age, and Midoriya couldn't help but feel a little excited because he could see Uraraka again and make amends if there had been any miscommunication. With a little more excitement, Midoriya repeated, so, do you want to go? It might be enjoyable, Todoroki acknowledged, observing him with his customary composed expression. The label with the word, quirkless, on his chest seemed to shine brighter than the mansion itself, and Midoriya felt completely out of place as he crossed the entrance. Todoroki stood beside him, his face expressionless, although his own label, fire, ice, was obvious to the other guests. The rare group of young people assembled there stood in sharp contrast to the mansion's size and elegance. In an attempt to calm himself, Midoriya's hand moved instinctively, tracing the kanji for person on his palm. There are so many people, he exclaimed, feeling both impressed and a little intimidated. Todoroki observed him with interest before adding in a composed voice. If you don't pretend to eat it, drawing the kanji for person on your hand won't help with anxiety. Oh okay. Midoriya complied clumsily, but it didn't seem to relieve his tension, as his eyes darted around anxiously and his back stayed rigid. Is this also your first time at a party? Todoroki inquired, appearing somewhat more relaxed than Midoriya, but possibly no less uneasy. Yeah, Midoriya answered, his voice quivering a little. As long as you can dance, you should be all right. Midoriya gave him a startled look before exclaiming. Todoroki, are you a dancer? No, Todoroki said casually, scratching the back of his neck. However, if someone wanted to teach me, I wouldn't mind. It was as though dark shadows were closing in around them, and Midoriya could sense danger coming even without a quirk like a sixth sense to alert him to it. When a girl said, "Hey, I'll teach you how to dance," with infectious energy. "No. Join me," an additional one interrupted, snatching Todoroki's arm. "I saw him first," a third girl added, nudging the others away with a gentle wave. Todoroki was quickly taken away by the group of girls, leaving Midoriya speechless as he heard his friend murmur, "What is this?" All Izuku could do was raise a hand toward him, but they had already vanished. Todoroki couldn't handle them, even with his quick reflexes in battle. Girls are definitely terrifying. Izuku, isolated and surrounded by strangers, muttered to himself as he tried to concentrate on his purpose for being there. "Maybe I should leave, but I came here to see Uraraka, and I think it's important to show her that she's one of my priorities, even though it might be difficult to find her among all of these people. I also can't just leave Todoroki. I could call his phone, but it would be difficult to hear over all of this noise, and I remember him saying he wasn't bringing his phone to avoid his dad calling. As for Uraraka, perhaps she's having fun and doesn't want to talk about anything serious right now, so should I text her to let her know I'm here? Perhaps I should have given this a little more thought before coming." A blonde boy with a French accent shoved a piece of cheese into Midoriya's mouth and said, "Okay. Then eat some cheese." Midoriya stepped back in surprise and bit into the cheese out of instinct. "He frightened me." Cheese. As Midoriya chewed, attempting to gather himself, he saw that the other boy's label also read, "Quirkless." Based on the fact that Kirishima had mentioned him in their messages and that his family was foreign, he concluded that this must be the party host. By any chance, are you Yuga Aoyama?" The blonde boy grinned with pride. He asked, spinning on his roller skates and turning on the disco ball on his belt, making everyone around him shield their eyes from the intense white light. "I'm sorry. I can't stop twinkling. If I weren't Yuga Aoyama, could I do this?" Midoriya blinked, still trying to take in the moment, and the other guests gave a brief round of applause for the boast before the party recommenced around them. "Ah. I appreciate you throwing this party for us all, but I was wondering why we were required to wear these labels at the door. Wouldn't it be more customary to write our names?" Names, in my opinion, don't reveal much about a person. This makes it simpler to strike up a conversation with strangers. I suppose it's effective because we're speaking at this moment. You're like me. Aoyama gestured toward Midoriya's label. "Did you just show up at my amazing party, or are you actually going to apply for the UA exam?" "Yes. I'll give it my best shot, and I'm sure I'll make it," Midoriya answered resolutely, then understood what Aoyama was getting at. "Hold on, won't you take the test?" Aoyama started skating in circles around Midoriya. "But who needs it? For now, my way of supporting heroes will be to encourage them and give them a good time before all the pressure hits. I think I'll throw another party for those who make it in. It's been a while since I gave up on the idea of being a hero in the traditional sense. I guess it shows I didn't have a strong conviction to begin with." He struck a dramatic pose, pretending to faint, but quickly recovered. "That sounds like a really nice gesture, but do your parents mind that you host parties like this?" Aoyama shrugged. "They're always traveling the world. As long as I keep my butler happy, they won't find out." "I understand. That sounds a little solitary." Aoyama pointed to both Midoriya's and his own labels and said, "Want to hear an interesting fact? And who wouldn't when it comes from me? Even though the official figure says that 20% of the world's population is still quirkless, I have data showing the percentage is much lower than that." Midoriya blinked, allowing the information to sink in. "I think you're the first quirkless person I've met in as long as I can remember." "Now that you mention it, I've had the same impression," Midoriya said, his voice reflective, "but why would they lie about something like that?" The conversation was interrupted by a deeper voice before Aoyama could reply. "I apologize for interrupting your conversation, but I wanted to bring up the fact that, although the official statistics show a lower percentage, there seem to be more heteromorphs than heteromorphs. That's precisely part of the bigger issue," said a boy with a crow-like face, his dark presence looming over the discussion. His label read, "Dark Shadow," in elegant letters. All of a sudden, Midoriya thought of the dejected fox woman he had met that rainy day. "Someone I met told me that, sometimes, they're treated like second-class citizens." Midoriya's face softened while he felt a little sad because he had first-hand knowledge of how quirkless people were frequently treated in the same manner. Tokiyami's dark eyes were focused on Midoriya's quirkless label as he looked at him thoughtfully. Tokiyami gave Midoriya a cafe card, but Aoyama grabbed it first. "Some people believe that society isn't ready to acknowledge that the system is broken. If you're interested in these topics, you could come to this place. It's where we meet occasionally. You all know that I dislike serious subjects at my parties." Aoyama turned on the light on his belt once more and whirled around, the brightness appearing even more intense this time. Tokiyami, also impacted by the glare, covered his face with his arm as Midoriya squinted, the bright light making it difficult to see. Tokiyami pulled back, still hiding his face, and said, "Sorry, my quirk doesn't handle excessive brightness too well." Aoyama, who obviously enjoyed being the center of attention, received a cheer and a murmur of approval from the kids around him, but Izuku, although appreciating the host's enthusiasm, couldn't help but worry about how he had treated Tokiyami. "Did you not treat him with a little rudeness?" Midoriya inquired. The question didn't bother Aoyama, who shrugged. "It comes into fashion every now and then, and people start talking about it like it's the next big thing," he said with contempt. "I don't think so. Besides, I know them. That guy is among a group of young fans who are obsessed with Destro's biography. I'd only suggest it if you enjoy spending hours discussing philosophical issues regarding quirks." Aoyama smiled and his eyes glowed as he gave Midoriya Tokiyami's card. "In my opinion, they wouldn't get along with someone who is constantly on the go and glowing." Midoriya slipped the card into his pocket and resumed scanning the room for Uraraka and Todoroki. To his surprise, he spotted Uraraka a few meters away, chatting animatedly with a blonde boy who was showing her some electricity sparking from his palm. As he brought his hand closer, her hair stood on end, making her laugh. Without realizing it, Midoriya's expression grew very serious. As if reading his mind, Aoyama added, "Oh, you're thinking they're having a lot of fun without you, aren't you? Or maybe you're jealous because you like her." Midoriya's face flushed so badly that he tried to cover it with both forearms. He confessed, still covering his face, that he came to talk to her, but he wasn't sure how. "And no, I don't know if it's jealousy, but it's true that I like her." Before moving through the crowd, Aoyama performed a little spinning pirouette on one foot in front of him. "That's something you'll have to figure out on your own. Matters of the heart are too delicate to interfere with. Excuse me, I have to tend to the rest of my guests." "Yeah, good to see you, and I appreciate your conversation. Stop talking about it. See you around." Aoyama waved goodbye, but he later muttered to himself, "But I don't know if we'll meet again." He could swear he was getting a little annoyed when Midoriya started to watch Uraraka and the blonde boy again, but he also thought Uraraka looked adorable when she laughed. He detested feeling guilty when he saw Uraraka with someone else, but he couldn't resist the growing urge in his chest that her lovely smile should be reserved for him alone. Izuku shook his head. Wasn't that a self-centered thought? What was going on with him? Such thoughts weren't typical of him. As he explained something to Uraraka, the boy next to her seemed to be absorbing all of her attention. He was showing her little spheres of electricity sparking from each of his fingers. Izuku looked at Uraraka's hand and thought, perhaps I could impress Uraraka at least once, like that guy, if I had a quirk. For instance, if I had All Might's strength, I could use just one finger to launch someone into the air. Then he raised the hand he had been staring at and pointed toward the blonde boy, his expression serious, wondering if he was dreaming or if that guy was getting dumber by the second. He repeated the motion with his thumb and index finger toward the ground with his other hand, which he found surprisingly more comforting than drawing the kanji for person in his palm. Izuku felt bad, but he shook his head once more. His hand shook slightly as he closed his eyes, thinking, perhaps if I had a quirk, I wouldn't have to work twice as hard as everyone else, and I'd have more free time to hang out. He was still pointing when he opened his eyes, and for some reason, he felt an unfamiliar energy fill his body, almost as if something might actually happen if he dared to release his finger. Stop being so dumb, please. There won't be anything noteworthy. He told himself, cruelly but realistically, you're quirkless, and that's never going to change. He recalled his early years, when he would blow as hard as he could, repeatedly, hoping to see a spark of fire emerge from his mouth, but no matter how hard he tried, all he tasted was disappointment, and that hope for acquiring a quirk was extinguished with each failed attempt. Izuku's hand moved slightly down and then up again. What had he got to lose now? Perhaps it would cheer him up. However, a hand touched his shoulder as he was ready to let go of his finger. Midoriya. How unexpected it is to see you here after you said you wouldn't come. Kirishima welcomed him with his customary zeal, his broad, sincere smile illuminating the room. The sound of his friend's voice startled Izuku, who was still trying to get his thoughts out of his head, and his heart skipped a beat, as though he had been caught in the act of doing something improper. Midoriya turned instantly as a playful voice teased him from behind. Looks like interest has a way of walking. It was Ashido, who was smiling mischievously. Ashido. Kirishima. Midoriya stumbled, attempting to conceal his nervousness as he let the words escape his lips. Uh, what were you doing just now? Kirishima asked, trying to peek in the direction Midoriya was trying to hide. Curious, Kirishima tilted his head slightly as he noticed Midoriya positioning himself between him and where he had been looking just seconds before. With his face burning and his mind racing, Midoriya blurted out, "And nothing," and waved his hands in front of his face as if to clear up any confusion. He was trying to keep Kirishima from seeing what he had been observing moments before. Ashido could easily see Uraraka talking to a man from where she was standing, and it didn't take her long to figure out what was going on. She began to jump up and down, her hands clenched into fists, as though she had discovered some romantic secret. "What are you up to?" Kirishima inquired, perplexed by her actions. They all tensed when a familiar voice interrupted, "Are you all going to keep chatting, or are you finally going to move the hell out of the way? I thought you said we were next." Bakugo growled with evident annoyance and pushed Kirishima away. Kei-Kachan. Midoriya took a step back, caught off guard, but Bakugo also appeared to have been surprised to see him. Bakugo gave him a quick glance, his eyes as keen as ever. "Hey." Kirishima nodded and snapped back to reality, saying, "You're right, Bakugo. We're next. There's no time to start a fight with Midoriya." Kirishima then started to walk toward the stage, followed by Ashido, who kept glaring at Midoriya in an attempt to unnerve him. With his jaw clenched and hands in his pockets, Bakugo walked silently behind them, followed by the other members of his band. Midoriya found himself alone once more as his thoughts returned. Izuku looked at his hand once more and asked himself, "What was I even thinking just a moment ago?" He shook his head, inhaled deeply, and then let out a slow exhale. "When had I started having all these thoughts?" he asked himself. He felt a little happier, and as he watched his friends take the stage, he became preoccupied with the idea that he would get to see them perform for the first time. Next, he saw Kachan using his finger to trace something in his palm before eating it with a tiny explosion. Wonderful. He gets anxious too, Midoriya thought. He could not help but think of the time when Kachan had first begun to practice the drums a few years ago, when he had used his head to demonstrate his drumming prowess in class. It had hurt a little then, but Midoriya had no ill will and now found it amusing. Before deciding whether or not to speak to Uraraka, he decided to stay and watch them play, even if it meant interrupting her conversation with her new friend, which, to be honest, he didn't mind at all. Leaning slightly toward the bathroom mirror, Toshinori had just finished brushing his teeth and was looking at his smile from every angle, satisfied as usual with his clean appearance. Admiring the gleam of his teeth, he whispered to himself, "Yes, everything is in order. A smile worthy of the symbol of peace, if I may say so myself," he said proudly. He was about to leave when a strange thing happened to him. Red, glowing marks appeared all over his body, spreading across him like veins of light. He didn't think much of it at first, thinking it was just a normal part of life, but as soon as he realized what was happening, the marks began to grow, pulsing with an intensity he couldn't ignore. He stepped back suddenly and yelled, "What the hell is this?" His heart was racing as he tried to shake himself, hoping to get rid of the marks, but they disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, leaving him standing in front of the mirror, gasping for air, but with no sign of what had happened. Toshinori exhaled, still bewildered, and tried to gather himself as he examined his reflection. What could this mean? He muttered, feeling as though something more profound was concealed behind the odd incident. The bathroom returned to its normal quiet. His mind suddenly flashed to Nana Shimura, her back to him, and when she looked over her shoulder, her face looked serious. That isn't possible. He was instantly struck by the memory of his recent encounter with Sir Night-Eye, a heated exchange of words that were still ringing in his ears. "You granted your power to a regular student without a special talent? Is this a joke?" Night-Eye had looked at him incredulously, his eyes brimming with rage and disappointment. Toshinori tried to remain composed while he felt the weight of his former colleague's remarks. "It's no joke. And you, better than anyone, know that I was also born without a quirk. But, All Might, you're an exception. This is total bullshit." Night-Eye's annoyance was evident in his tone. Trying not to let the pressure get to him, Toshinori insisted, "My decision is already made." He knew he had made the right decision in picking Midoriya, but every word from his former ally started to raise doubts. "Then tell me who he is, and I'll show you with facts that Mirio is a much better option. If the power transfer isn't finished, it might still be possible to persuade him to give it to Mirio." Night-Eye's tone had become more urgent, almost begging. Toshinori answered calmly and resolutely, "You know you're not giving me your best self by saying that, right? In fact, I think I'd rather keep it a secret for his safety, at least until you calm down and can assure me you'll respect my decision." He couldn't let Midoriya lose one for all after he had already shown himself worthy. Then it seems we won't be seeing each other for some time, All Might, he said, ending the conversation as Night Eyes stood up, his face solemn and his voice icier than usual. Feeling the weight of their final separation, Toshinori stood up as well. I'm sorry to hear that, he said, his sadness barely perceptible. Holding his chin in the present, Toshinori pondered, the image of Nana Shimura looming in his mind, her eyes stern but far away. Master, he whispered. You don't think I made a mistake in choosing young Midoriya, do you? He began to doubt whether he had been too hasty in his choice. As he recalled another conversation with his teacher, on a sunny day with a clear blue sky that he could still feel, his mind briefly cleared and Nana smiled at him as she gracefully descended from the sky. She had stated, with a conviction that still echoed in his heart, that one for all is a precious gift for those willing to give everything of themselves for others without expecting anything in return. Toshinori inhaled deeply, holding fast to that memory. Midoriya had repeatedly shown himself deserving of that authority, and he was confident that the young man would accomplish great things, that his unadulterated heart and unwavering will would enable him to overcome the most formidable obstacles. But then, what did those red marks that had appeared on him mean? Shigaraki stood in a dark alley, his figure barely lit by the dim light of nearby street lamps. Puddles of stagnant water at his feet, the smell of dampness permeating the air, the echo of dripping water from nearby roofs still echoing in the deserted streets, a small video game store behind him gleaming with neon lights, the only color in a world that had always been gray to him, and his eyes, lost in nothingness, showed a contemplative expression as he obsessively scratched his hand, a habit he had never been able to break. Shigaraki whispered, his voice barely audible above the background noise of the city. Sometimes, the dampness after the rain still hurts my skin. Just like when I was a kid, he added, with a hint of bitterness in his tone, as if the memory annoyed him just as much as the sensation on his skin. A figure slowly arose from the shadowy corner of the street, and Spinner, his longtime friend, came cautiously closer, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of loyalty and worry. The silence that surrounded them was broken by Spinner's uncertain words. Hey, are you really sure about what you want to do? I think you still have time if you want to change your mind. Rather than answer right away, Shigaraki gave a brief, sharp laugh that startled Spinner, who rarely saw Shigaraki laugh, and when he did, it was always a disturbing sound. I think in the end, it was like that guy said. The time has come for me to move on. I can't stay in the trial level forever, no matter how fun it is. Now I'm too curious to know what's in the next levels. The years we spent together as hikikomori playing video games were undoubtedly the happiest of my life, Shigaraki said, his voice now somewhat softer, as if recalling those moments with a strange nostalgia. He looked up at the sky, which still had signs of the recent rain, and waited a few seconds before continuing. Shigaraki's face changed slightly as he spoke, his expression shifting from one of calm to one of darker determination, all for one's words echoing in his mind with a disconcerting clarity, and occasionally that voice still chilled him, as though the man who had shaped him still held power over him. The voice paused, then went on with an almost paternal coldness. So you've decided to abandon me, Tamura. All for one's words flooded his mind like an echo he couldn't ignore. Ha ha ha. But don't be afraid. I have no intention of stopping you. You've always been free to decide, in a way. Although, he said, I'm sure that sooner or later you'll grow bored of this rebellious side you've chosen to adopt, and in the end, you'll try to go further. You'll see. Shigaraki shivered, but he didn't let those words stop him. After all, he tried to convince himself that he was no longer bound by all for one's expectations, but his mentor's shadow was still there, watching. Whatever you decide, I'll follow you. Spinner's voice jerked him out of his reverie, and his friend stood in front of him, his posture firm, staring at him loyally. I'm sure it was fate that led us to that man who was mumbling unintelligibly on the street. I don't really believe in that, to be honest. Shigaraki paused to think, scratching the skin of his hand once more. I think life goes round and round in unexpected ways. Sometimes everything seems clear, but then everything changes over the smallest thing. Shigaraki narrowed his eyes, allowing Spinner's words to linger in the air before answering. Fate, he repeated slowly, savoring the word. And I want that. I want the world, this society that I detest so much, to see everything turned upside down, just like I've been seeing it for years. His voice, once apathetic, now carried a dark weight, a purpose that went beyond any game or whim. He looked up, his eyes shining with a fierce determination that Spinner had never seen before. Let's take this to the next level, Spinner, he said calmly, in contrast to the monster inside him. It's time for the world to get ready for us. The alley, which had once been a haven, now appeared small, unable to contain the destructive thoughts racing through Shigaraki's mind. The puddles reflected the gray sky, but in his eyes, there was only chaos. Shigaraki grinned as the chilly wind carried away the last of the storm's drops, but it had nothing to do with consolation or tranquility.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.